Ladies and gentlemen, recorded in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, it's time for Fight Night Picks with your hosts, Craig and Matt Allen.
And we are so glad to be back with Fight Night Picks. As always, one half of your hosting duo, Craig Allen. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. With me to my left, to your right, as always, respective socials, at Matt Allen FNP and at Matt Allen FNP. Last weekend, UFC 275. It was absolutely wild. All sorts of crazy stuff going on. A new champion. How crazy is that? And at flyweight, almost a new champion, but sometimes we can't have nice things. This weekend, though, 14 total fights on the lineup, headlined by Calvin Kattar taking on Josh Emmett. But I know I was very excited about the set of prelims that we have coming up this weekend. I'm all over it. I'm all about it. And I figured, hey, what the heck? This is the second time the UFC's gone to Texas this year. UFC 271, the other card. They've already gone to that state 22 times in the promotion's history. So tack one up for the board. Throw one up there for the boys, Matt. I've gone with the bolo tie. I've gone with the shirt with the guy shooting ducks. I'm going to shoot some Miller High Life. Matt, what are we saying about this one? Let's get crazy.
We have a phenomenal card ahead of us. UFC 275 was one of those pay-per-views that I'm still excited about. Like, after that main event was done, I'm not ashamed to admit, it took me like an hour and a half to fall asleep. I was just scrolling Twitter. I'm listening to what other people have to say about it. It was one of those main events that was so exciting. Like, you think about it the next day, you think about it the next week. Like, that was how good of a fight that we had between Yuri Prochazka and Gloria Teixeira. Hopefully we do get a main event of that, because if their next fight's even half as crazy as their last fight was, I think it would still result in a potential fight of the night. But this fight night card we have ahead of us is going to be phenomenal. You sort of said it. You had texted me before the pay-per-view started, and you were like, hey, I think I might be more excited for next weekend's main event in this fight night card than I am for last week's pay-per-view. Now, I will be honest, it's going to be very difficult to top last weekend's pay-per-view, but this main card is going to be great. Yeah, everybody knows Tim the Dirty Bird Means has a special place in my heart, but he's fighting Kevin Holland. That's a very tough fight at 170, and this weekend's main event between Josh Emmett and Calvin Kattar is a fight that, even if you're not really a big MMA fan and you're just sort of a casual observer of the sport, this is a main event I think anybody can get interested in.
It's an absolutely loaded card. We're going to throw it on over to our Fight Night Picks Fight of the Night screen. Be sure to let us know down below in that comment section who you have, because again, 14 fights to choose from, some returns, a lot of exciting fights. Let's throw it on over to the Fight of the Night screen.
Let us know down below in the comment section who you've got. It's time for the Fight of the Night with Fight Night Picks.
Coming up this weekend, Adrian Yanez taking on primetime Tony Kelley. These guys don't like each other. Tony Kelley, I'm surprised he's even going to be fighting this weekend. If you listen to the Cage Side Press Gabriel Gonzalez interview, which I'll touch on in the overall breakdown, but these two guys, very dynamic. Kelley looked amazing his last time out against Randy Costa at the end of last year. Adrian Yanez had a fight of the night his last time out against Davey Grant. So I think this is going to be a great one. Obviously, what Tony Kelley said after Andrea Lee's fight, or during Andrea Lee's fight with Viviane Araújo, lit a fire under Adrian Yanez.
Certainly did.
You probably don't want that. This is Yanez's first fight in Texas. How wild is that? He's a Houston guy. The Houston-Louisiana rivalry, it is ablaze, and I think this is going to be an amazing fight.
Both of these guys find themselves in a fight very similar to their last ones. Tony Kelley fought Randy Costa, a fairly hyped up prospect who we all knew had holes in his game. We just didn't really know how many. Now he's fighting Adrian Yanez, one of the hottest prospects in the division. And yes, he had a really entertaining fight with Davey Grant, but Davey Grant sort of offered a lot of the same question marks that Tony Kelley should offer in this fight, and I think it should be a great one. You know, if Adrian Yanez is able to put on a really impressive performance against a guy like Tony Kelley, he might even be able to get his name into the rankings, or at least fight a ranked opponent his next time out, because he is more popular than just your average unranked fighter. I do feel like Adrian Yanez has done a really good job marketing himself in the cage and outside of the cage, so I could see with an impressive performance him getting a ranked opponent next.
Yanez is a big fan of hitting that fizz with a DP. I'm talking Dr. Pepper. This should be a very, very good fight. Fight Night Picks, we don't like to cherry pick off of a main event, but Calvin Kattar, Josh Emmett, it is one of those fights that you can't miss. And I mean, for Calvin Kattar's last time out, absolutely brutalized Giga Chikadze. For Josh Emmett, a very close fight against Dan Ige, but when you watch Josh Emmett fights, this guy has the touch of death. You saw that in the Ige fight. He was able to get a knockdown in the first round. Rounds 2 and 3, very close. But again, this is one of those fights. You can't blink. You don't blink. And we threw it out there to the YouTube community tab. When we break this fight down, we'll talk about your votes. We'll talk about your comments, but a lot of people very fired up. Maybe more picking one fighter than the other, but it takes two to tango, and I think this is a good one.
This is a perfect 5-round fight because for Calvin Kattar, he proved so many people wrong his last time out. People forget how big of an underdog he was considered going into that Giga Chikadze fight. Giga, the new thing on the block. Everybody was hot on Giga at the time, and Calvin Kattar brutalized him. He looked as good as he had ever looked, and that was almost to the year, a 1-year anniversary off of the Max Holloway loss, and that was a loss that... Listen, if the wrong person gets beat that badly, that could really change their career, or maybe even end their career. So for Calvin Kattar to come back and look as good as he did against Giga Chikadze, it makes me that much more excited to see him in this fight against Josh Emmett. Like you said, against Dan Ige, it was a close fight. It was a great fight. Josh Emmett might be the pound-for-pound hardest hitter in the UFC. I don't think that's a controversial statement to make. Of course, Francis has, like, the most powerful punch, but he's a giant amongst us. Josh Emmett is just like a regular guy. If you walked into a 7-Eleven, you'd be like, wow, that guy's very stocky. But other than that, you wouldn't think like, oh...
Stocky?
Stocky. He's short, he's thick.
He's not built like George Costanza.
Like a muscular. If George Costanza went to like Planet Fitness, he could have been Josh Emmett. That would have made Seinfeld way more different. But anyways, but for Josh Emmett, if he hits you, you go down. I don't care who you are, how good your chin is, what your track record of eating big shots is. Josh Emmett might be the hardest hitter for his size in the UFC. So I do think this will be a great main event.
Well, we'll have to see what happens when Josh is getting angry. And I think it's going to be a very, very fun one. Again, be sure to let us know down below in that comment section who you have, because there's 14 different choices. Is Magulov Kutateladze? That's like a...
That was my pick, guys.
That is in the conversation. There's a lot of great fights that are out there, so hit up that comment section, and you can't go wrong. All right, so when it comes to some of these cards, you know, a lot of people, they put a lot of stock in ranked fighters being on a card. There's 14 total fights, so you have 28 fighters. How many of them are ranked? Two of them. They're both in the main event. But again, it's not one of those cards. You have the return of Guram Kutateladze. He's going to be taking on the former M1 Global lightweight champ Damir Ismagulov. You also have the former welterweight and middleweight champ in Albert Duraev. He's going to be taking on New Mansa Joaquin Buckley. It's one of those cards, top to bottom, very good. Only one debut. It's out of the former Jungle Fights flyweight champ Natalia Silva. She's been out for years. You don't know what she's going to look like when she was fighting on the regional scene. It's something. But she's taking on the former CFFC title challenger and Canadian Jasmine Jasudavicius. But Matt, again, this is one of those cards like kicking off the card. Daukaus, Roman Dolidze, Deron, Winn, Phil Hawes. Like, it's wild how good this card is.
And that's what I wanted to highlight. Like, we have two fights on these prelims in Daukaus versus Roman Dolidze. That's a main card-worthy fight on a lot of different Fight Night cards. And also, Cody Stamann versus Eddie Wineland is going way under the radar. Cody Stamann, not that long ago, was considered like a top dog at 135. And I know Eddie Wineland's fairly past his prime, but still, he's going to offer a very tough fight to pretty much anybody. And we all know Cody Stamann isn't the greatest on the feet, which is definitely where Eddie Wineland thrives. So I think that could be a really fun fight that's definitely been buried on this fight card.
So many great fights, and again, coming up this weekend, we will have Fight Night Picks, question mark kicks. We're both here, we're both live, we're both in person. The only thing I will say, Matt, is the fact that the crown in my front tooth fell off today.
Wow.
After eating a piece of cheesecake. I have never been more nervous that I'm going to lose my front tooth in an episode of Fight Night Picks. So we'll see how that plays out. We'll hope that the fix-ident works from now until Friday when it gets fixed. But overall, a wild, wild set of fights, and we hope that you can join us along the way. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say, let's get into it. Coming up this weekend, couple of big-time middleweight finishers, and they're looking to make it like Guns N' Roses in 1990 or Bob Dylan back in 1973, because these two are knocking on the rankings door. We have Roman Dolidze. He's taking on Daukaus. Yes, you know, Chris's brothers. Well, there's only one, or Chris Brothers, like the pepperoni that they make in the Maritimes out of Nova Scotia. But when we do focus on this matchup, the main key point is the fact that this fight was booked quite a few months ago, many months ago, and realistically, Roman Dolidze was unable to make the walk. They rebooked him against Brendan Allen, and then he couldn't make it to that fight. And for Daukaus, he was booked in a couple of different matchups, but ultimately he was able to take on Jamie Pickett back in February. First round submission win in that fight. And now they've rebooked Dolidze with Daukaus. And Matt, we spoke about this fight a couple of months ago. Not really sure if the Jamie Pickett win has all that much bearing on it, but we'll throw it on back to that original prediction video. We'll update you with the odds and give you a final look at the preview and prediction for Dolidze versus Daukaus. Matt, Kyle Daukaus, he's really broken out of that shell. And no matter what you make of his last fight, which was no contest against Kevin Holland, he was having a ton of success before the clash of heads. And then after the clash of heads, he had even more success where he was able to finish the fight. But after the fact, you know, we have that replay review where members of the UFC were in the ear of the commission. That was a really awkward moment.
It was a no contest, Craig. I don't like what you're doing right now.
It was a no contest. I just don't like it when Mark Ratner and Sean Shelby are able to kind of enter into the conversation.
Craig, there were refs around there too, and that's their job to monitor the film and to give that information to the ref inside the cage. They did nothing wrong.
It was awkward. Now we get a fight that's not as awkward as their banter right there, because for Roman, he was getting ready for a fight against your boy, Eric Anders. Anders out of the fight, and it was supposed to be the rematch of that fight between Kevin Holland and Kyle Daukaus for this weekend. So both guys, they just crisscross, everybody clap your hands. We get this fight. Come on, yeah. So Matt, when I look at this one, I can talk about the accolades, and I have in video after video after video for our fighter out of Georgia here. He's a former FILA World Grappling champion, ADCC guy. He's medaled in certain competitions. But when you watch Roman Dolidze fight, the trouble I have and the biggest takeaway that I have is he almost gets too busy trying to impress everybody at home and his coaches and not as focused on finishing the fight at hand. That got him in trouble against Trevin Giles, where it started to go a little bit more downhill as that fight went on. And we make jokes. It's a Fight Night Picks exclusive. Matt kind of rolls his eyes. That Trevin Giles power jab was on point that night. And then in his last fight for Roman, he fights Laureano Staropoli, where, yeah, he does have a lot of success. It's just, I wish he would finish more fights. And for Kyle Daukaus, we bring it back. He loses his UFC debut on short notice against Brendan Allen, but there were a lot of positives to take out of it. He finished strong in that fight. It was a good one. Then he comes out, he beats Dustin Stoisfus, a guy that might be a little small, maybe for 185, but a very well-rounded guy on paper, 100%. He wins that fight and looks good. Then he loses to Phil Hawes. Okay. All right. And then he was on his way to beating Kevin Holland.
No,
even
he
before
wasn't. Let's stop it. Nothing happened up until then. Craig, even if you look at the stats, Kyle Daukaus had 9 strikes. Kevin Holland had 3 up until the head clash. He at least landed 1 strike after the head clash. So you cannot stand here and tell me that Kyle Daukaus was dominating Kevin Holland when he was ahead by like 2 significant
him up
strikes
against the
before
cage, was working the takedowns.
If you put any stock into that fight, I can't put any stock into the Kevin Holland matchup. I really can't. Because Kevin Holland, Roman Dolidze.
This is the point. This is the point that I'll make before I hand it off to you. The only positive that I have out of the Holland fight, well, actually, there's 2. 1, spotlight wasn't too big against 2020's Fighter of the Year, whose star has definitely diminished. It definitely has, but the spotlight wasn't too big in a giant fight. 2, in that fight, he didn't look all that bad, and he was able to accentuate the things that he's good at. Where I want to hand this off to you, Matt, is the fact that Kyle Daukaus is a decent striker, but excels at grappling. He's going to take on one of the scariest grapplers at 185 pounds coming up this weekend. So I really do want to get your thoughts on just this matchup alone. Dolidze, who is scheduled to take on a guy that's pretty good at striking, but also wrestling, and Eric Anders, some comparables there, versus Kyle Daukaus, who is getting ready for a primary striker if there ever was one.
This thing about Roman, he's the better grappler when his gas tank is near full. Like, cars don't work like this in real life, where the less gas you have, the slower you move. But that kind of is the case with Roman.
There's only one episode of Seinfeld where Kramer tries to take the Saab as far as he can. But even then, the Saabs turn out like Roman, and in the 3rd round, you get scared.
But Roman can have success grappling against Kyle Daukaus for like 3 minutes in this fight, and then I really do think the field gets even. Like, if you could have success grappling against Brendan Allen, I think you can have success grappling against Roman Dolidze. I don't not believe that for a second. Like, Allen's a much more consistent fighter than Dolidze. He's a much more polished fighter than Dolidze. And they do a lot of the same stuff. And I really do think that if you can face adversity against a really big, strong grappler like Brendan Allen early in their fight, and then turn around and borderline get a 10-8 round against him in the third, does that not exactly sound like how a fight against Roman Dolidze would go with Kyle Daukaus? He might lose the first 2 rounds, but come on really strong in the third. This is what I like about Daukaus. If he knows he's behind in a fight, he goes for it. He doesn't just like kind of rest back and think, okay, if I win this round, maybe it'll tie it up. Like, there is an urgency to his game that I really do appreciate. That's where this fight gets really interesting, because more than any other fight on this card, this comes down to cardio. If Roman does go for takedowns, I guess, okay, I'll flip this around. It comes down to cardio, but it comes down to how well can Kyle Daukaus defend the takedown attempts of Roman. Because on the feet, Daukaus's jab should actually be able to give Dolidze some trouble on the outside, because with Dolidze, it's a lot of those looping wild shots where you aim big, you miss big. And if Daukaus can stay pretty technical and accurate on the outside, I think he can have good success, although I do worry about him against really polished strikers in this division. But on the mat, I think Daukaus is honestly the better grappler. I think stylistically, this is kind of a tough matchup for Dolidze, because hear me out. With Roman, he is great when he's really explosive, but everything he does is extremely unique. He goes for leg locks. He doesn't go for traditional submissions and transitions. I think when you're doing all that like unique, weird stuff, that's great. But the second you get tired, that's when we see just a really consistent fighter start to overtake you. And that's why I could see that's when we could see Kyle Daukaus. I think we could see him out grapple Dolidze for big moments in this fight.
Well, this is the funny thing. So as we're talking about this one, I figured, okay, I'm going to look up Dolidze's fights in the UFC. So he fought Hadis Ibrahimov, no longer in the UFC. He fought John Allen, who lost to a short notice opponent, Dustin Jacoby, on the weekend. So beats John Allen. I just want to get that out of the way. Loses to Trevin Giles, who on his best day is a top 15 middleweight. And I'm not joking about that. We got to start giving Trevin his flowers. Houston's finest. And then he beats Laureano Staropoli, a blown up welterweight who just got cut from the UFC after losing to the Nightwolf, Jamie Pickett. So, Matt, the wins, I mean, he beat John Allen by split. Again, he had a lot of success. We could say the
same thing about Daukaus, though.
Now,
if we're being honest.
Hear me out. This is where I'm going with my point. Against Hadis Ibrahimov, Roman's the favorite. Against John Allen, he's the favorite. Against Trevin Giles, he's the favorite. Against Laureano Staropoli, he's the favorite. Matt, I'm going to try and find you some sites that have odds on this one. Dolidze opened this fight a plus 120 underdog. He's a plus 180 underdog. For Kyle Daukaus, he is a decent-sized favorite, open to minus 140, minus 223 right now. We've never seen Roman Dolidze as an underdog in the UFC, and that's quite a bit of a surprise. Like, again, it's not surprising until it is. It's surprising when it happens. That's why I am surprised.
It's because it's not scary anymore. Like with Roman Dolidze, you know what's under the bed. It's a guy who's really good but gets tired. Like there's no more monsters. We kind of know the information we need to know about Dolidze. Before it was okay.
That's kind of what my wife ends up with, like late at night. You know, she tries wrestling under the covers. It's a guy that's, you know, late at night. He's under there. He gets tired, so you better get the work out of the way quick.
Not where I thought this was going. Here's the thing. With Daukaus, he's just a more consistent guy. And the thing is, if I've seen you lose because you get tired in the past, I'm pretty sure it's going to continue to happen to you in the future. And even in the John Allen fight, we brought that up on the prediction show last week, where that fight was pretty close, like closer than either one of us would probably want to admit. And it was only close, not because technically the fighters were very similar. It's just because Roman gets so tired. I don't know if it's the weight cut. I don't know if it's just because he is so muscle bound for this division. Like there has to be some sort of a factor. He puts a lot behind his shots. It's always like all gas, no brakes with Dolidze. That's my real problem. And this is why I think Daukaus can out-grapple him. We've even seen Rodolfo Vieira get out-grappled in the UFC. I know that's a bit of a soft spot on this channel, but it's the truth. Fatigue makes a coward out of men. I don't know who said that quote, but I know it's a famous one. I think that's going to... There you go. I think that's going to be the case with Roman. I think he will look good in the first round, but like we've seen before, if Kyle Daukaus can get over that speed bump, get over that hurdle, I think he'll be able to take over as the fight progresses.
So we have a look at the odds for this matchup, and it's Kyle Daukaus, the favorite, open to minus 175, minus 233 right now. For Georgia's Dolidze, open to plus 150, plus 187 or thereabouts. So, I mean, Matt, I'm going to have a look at the Tapology votes. They're a surprise to us as they are to you folks out there. And with Kyle Daukaus being that big of a favorite, I will say, I'll say over under 67.5%.
I'll say over.
You're going to say that it's over, and it is over. 910 total votes, 81% Daukaus, 65% by decision, 28% by submission. For the 19% that have Dolidze, the former FILA World Grappling Champ, 56% by decision, 28% by knockout, and some change on the submission. So, Matt, I mean, originally we had Daukaus. We're here. We're having fun. It's June. Do we still have Daukaus? What are you thinking about this matchup here?
I do still like Daukaus in this fight because here's the thing for Roman Dolidze. I know he has more wins than losses in the UFC, but when you look at his UFC career, are you really wowed by any of the performances? Because I gotta be honest, I've never been all that impressed by any of his singular performances. It's a lot of really nice burst out the gate, and then we all kind of know what the story is. He does decline as the fight continues. And for Kyle Daukaus, he is going to look for success in a lot of the same areas Roman Dolidze will look for success in this fight. They're both going to try and take it to the ground, but in very different ways. Roman more with high trips and whatnot, and Kyle Daukaus with more of a traditional wrestling approach. The difference is, I think Kyle Daukaus is a much heavier fighter once he does get on top in these positions, whereas with Roman, yes, he's very physically strong, but he's one of these fighters who has a tendency to float a little bit too much in that top position. And I do think a grappler like Kyle Daukaus, if he can just continue to wrestle through some of these positions, could eventually get in that top position and then outwork Dolidze.
When we watch Roman Dolidze fight, it's like he didn't have a dad that cared about him when he was a kid, because he's just out there going, do you like this, coach? Should I do this more, coach? Like,
He's looking for approval.
You don't have to get the approval of Eric Nixick. Just finish the fucking fight. So for Roman Dolidze, again, I like the big movements. I like the finishes that he had coming into the UFC. But again, if we have a look at it, that Michael Pasternak win with WWFC was 3.5 years ago.
Exactly.
He had the long layoff, little bit of USADA stuff. He beats Kadis Ibrahimov by finish, which was... I mean, that was like a fidget spinner 4 years ago. He gets a win by split over John Allen, loses to Trevin Giles, and beats Laureano Staropoli, a blown-up welterweight who really fizzled out at the end. We were all expecting big things out of old blonde hair Laureano. But yeah, for me, Kyle Daukaus, again, I get it. The 5-on-in, it's not as sexy as Roman Dolidze. You have the no contest against Kevin Holland. You have a loss to Brennan Allen in the debut and a loss to Phil Hawes, where he did get out-wrestled. But if you do look at it, nice win over Dustin Stoisfus, the finish win over Jamie Pickett. For me, Kyle Daukaus, a little bit busier when he's on the feet. When it comes to grappling, defensively, I like how sound he is. It's just, if Dolidze can put on the pressure, Dolidze can keep the wrestling going, I'm not sure if he's going to be able to do it. And even for Hawes, he started to kind of slow down in the third round as that fight wore on.
And the thing for Daukaus, too, I know we both don't rate that Jamie Pickett win all that highly, but it is a good just getting back on the horse win, you know? He didn't look great against Kevin Holland. I know there was the headbutt, and he was able to get the submission win over Holland, but it was a weird fight. He did sort of need that reset, and I do feel like the Jamie Pickett win was just a good confidence builder for him going into this matchup. So I do feel like Kyle Daukaus is just in a better position in his career overall for this fight.
Both of us going with the man that wants to be known as the Darce Knight. It's Kyle Daukaus to get the win. We have some big time fights, and listen, do I think middleweight's the best division in all of MMA? No, I don't. But some of the best middleweight fights you're going to find are on this card. Just keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Similar to a fight between Roman Dolidze and Kyle Daukaus, it's also found on this card. If you missed it, go back, have a look at it. We have a rebooking of Phil Hawes and Deron Winn. And I mean, if you're like a kid in the 90s, you're Canadian like us, maybe you knew the song by Fred Penner. The cat came back the very next day. The cat came back, thought he was a goner. I thought this fight was a goner, but it wasn't. This is the third time that the friggin' thing's been booked. I can't tell you why. I don't know who's excited about this one. I mean, Habib, Tony Ferguson, they booked that one 5 times, and so this one's third. Third time's the charm. And that's at least what we're hoping.
If it doesn't happen this time, it's not meant to be.
Now, I mean, realistically, the only difference from then and from now, from the original time this was booked last summer, is the fact that Phil Hawes decided to take a fall nap against Chris Curtis when he fought him. Definitely didn't go his way. Took that fight on short notice. Deron Winn, well, he's done nothing since he fought Antonio Hoyo. So we're going to throw it on back to the original video, update you with the latest and greatest of the odds, and offer up that final preview prediction. We have Megatron Calvin Johnson trying to catch balls from Matthew Stafford for the Detroit Lions in the mid-2000s. No, we don't. It's Megatron Phil Hawes taking on Deron Winn. And Matt, while the picture and the graphic that we made up for this week, I made it look a little bit funny. It's not that funny. It's no joke. Deron Winn is actually 5'6". I measured him with a tape. I'm just taking it on faith that ESPN and the UFC are legit with their height measurements, but we're going to find out on Friday when these two guys weigh in, and hopefully successfully. Deron Winn's last fight was at a catch weight of 195 when he took on Antonio Hoyo, one of the most frustrating fights ever, because if you're a Deron Winn fan, he wrestled and wrestled and wrestled and wrestled and just held position. And if you're an Antonio Hoyo fan, you threw things at your TV because the guy could have struck with him and he had opportunities. But you could say that about every single Antonio Hoyo fight that he's had in the UFC, and now he's gone. For Deron Winn, the wins that he's had, and listen, the guy's 2-2 in the promotion. He beat Eric Spicely in a fight of the night, and they struck, which is weird.
It was a really good fight, too.
He lost to Darren Stewart by split decision. He lost by submission to Gerald Meerschaert. He beats Antonio Hoyo. The two guys that he's beat are no longer in the UFC. For Deron Winn, this is the weirdest thing. Deron Winn, when he steps into the UFC octagon, he will become a member of the all-active light heavyweight team. He will be in the rankings as far as their stat leaders are concerned. And the reason being, you have to have 5 fights in the UFC. So as soon as he steps foot in there, unless something happens to Phil Hawes, he enters in as the number 6 participant with most takedowns in active UFC light heavyweight history, tied at 19 with Alexander Gustafsson in 4 fights where he didn't take Eric Spicely down. In 3 fights, he's been able to do what some guys take their whole career to do that are still in the UFC, mind you. Deron Winn is a practical wrestler. He's taken on an MMA wrestler in Phil Hawes this weekend.
Deron Winn started the whole, oh, you're Jerry's brother? Sing us a song type of a trend in MMA because, see? Because before Deron Winn came along, it wasn't that often that we had, hey, oh, you train with this guy? Well, you could probably fight in the UFC. And then Daniel Cormier became champ. And then Deron Winn became one of the most hyped up middleweights in the whole UFC division. Really the organization, because
some would say the Martin Sano of 185.
Exactly, because that is how Winn was marketed when he came into the UFC. It was, oh, you've spent your whole life wrestling with Daniel Cormier. You're a really good boxer, too. Like, he was almost AKA's version of Aaron Pico. When Aaron Pico was with Freddie Roach, and then when he went down to Jackson's, it was, wow, this guy has all the skills. He now just needs the MMA experience. And I'm going to harp on you a little bit, because you put a lot of stock into his win over one filthy Tom Lawler on a Oscar De La Hoya promoted card. And I got to be honest, that didn't prove anything to me. And Deron Winn coming into the UFC hasn't really looked like that same fighter that he showed against Tom Lawler.
They had a fight of the night.
That's fine against Eric Spicely, who's been in the UFC like Ric Flair's held the world title. It's happened.
Eric Spicely.
You might like him, Craig. It doesn't mean he's great. This is the problem with Deron Winn. He really only goes in there to wrestle a lot of the time. And I know people like to say that about some fighters. Oh, he's just a wrestler. But normally it is a massive exaggeration. With Deron Winn, it isn't. He goes into the cage to wrestle. And like you said, he didn't wrestle at all against Eric Spicely, but that is the anomaly in his career. The majority of the time, he fights more like Cody Stamann. It's, I'm going to get my head out of trouble. I'm just going to stand so far away that my opponent can't hit me, or going to be so close that I'm wrestling my opponent. Phil Hawes has shown the ability to defend takedowns and outstrike primary wrestlers in the past. Look at Kyle Daukaus. Kyle Daukaus, he's a pretty good grappler himself, and I would honestly say Kyle Daukaus has slightly more skills on the feet, just in terms of like range finding weapons and whatnot.
Yeah, so if you look at it for Phil Hawes, if you're a numbers guy, if you're a numbers gal, if you're a numbers person, you look at it for Phil Hawes, it says 100% takedown defense, but only Kyle Daukaus was the one that tried to take him down out of any of his UFC or UFC adjacent fights. That includes Contender Series, and Daukaus went 0 for 7. Look at Kyle Daukaus. Forget about the clash of heads, whatever.
It's hard to.
Look at Kyle Daukaus when he fought Kevin Holland, when Holland was John at Daniel Cormier. Daukaus was even having success there. He was cranking around. He was having fun. He was starting to implement his game. With Phil Hawes, he said, get that garbage out of here, like Jack Armstrong would say. And Phil Hawes was able to implement his game plan. The scores, 2 of them scored at 30-26. One had it 29-28. There was a 10-8 in the third round. What does Phil Hawes do well? He has insane power. He has really good high kicks for a guy that's so big at 185 pounds. And this is a guy in Phil Hawes that I heard pumped up so much. Again, Deron Winn got pumped up a lot. Rashad Evans pumped up Phil Hawes a lot. He was a guy that I knew, okay, if I ever see Phil Hawes fight, because I used to look at his record and I go, why isn't he like with the PFL? Because he used to fight for World Series. Why haven't I heard more about it? I know he's been on different shows and he's been here and there, but it just, when the moment was big, Phil Hawes never really got the win. Julian Marquez is the perfect example of that. And then he ends up on Contender Series and he beats Haji Basayev. Okay, that's pretty good. And then he flatlines Jacob Malkoun, and that win ages a little bit better. Like cheap wine, not like fine wine, like cheap wine, because Malkoun looked good against Al Hassan, but that's neither here nor there. And then he fights Nasruddin Imavov. And I thought Imavov won that fight. But you can make an argument. The scores for that one, 28-28 and 29-28. It's a majority decision win for Phil Hawes. Again, Imavov outstruck him. Phil Hawes did a little bit of wrestling. And then Hawes is able to beat Daukaus and also take him down and try for a submission. I said early when I flipped it over to you, one guy's an MMA wrestler. One guy is a practical wrestler, a pure wrestler, if you will. So Phil Hawes comes into this fight as a decently sized favorite, open to minus 240, minus 255 right now. Deron Winn open to plus 205, somewhere in the range of a plus 210 or thereabouts. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprise to us, there are to you. I'm going to say over under 85% Phil Hawes.
I'll say under.
You're going to say under. It is over. 908 total votes, 91% Hawes, 33% by decision, 80% by knockout for the 9% that have Deron Winn, 75% by decision. Matt, Deron Winn in the UFC, there's been ups.
He hasn't looked great.
There's been downs. He beat Eric Spicely.
Exactly.
He beat Antonio Hoyo. Neither one of them are in the UFC. He lost to Darren Stewart. He lost to Gerald Mearshart. One of them is in the UFC.
Deron Winn has all the warning signs. Like, the NBA draft's coming up soon, right? And Chet Holmgren's a guy who might go first overall. And he's very tall, he's lanky, he's extremely thin, he's sort of hunched over. You look at him and you think, wow, there's some warning signs there for a guy who has to play 82 games in the NBA. Like, physically, you've got to hold up against some really high-level athletes. When you look at Deron Winn, there are some worrying signs. Like, he's
like a pack of cigarettes.
Exactly. There's all the warning signs all over it, and they put it in, like, an awful carton, and they're like, hey, don't use these. Deron Winn's something you shouldn't... Like, if he's in UFC 4, they should just have a big X over it. Don't use this ever. Sean Vellante should have one of those, too. Did not think I was going to take a shot at him today, but anyways. For Deron Winn, he's a 5'6" middleweight who struggles to make weight at the middleweight division. Those are extremely worrying signs. And the thing is, everybody talks about how great of a wrestler he is, and he is a good wrestler, but it's almost like he's been indoctrinated to now become a boxer, because in his fighting style, he looks for his boxing first, and then his wrestling in a lot of situations. And I know he looked better against Ahoyo his last time out, but Ahoyo throws one punch around, and he's a very awkward fighter himself who has a lot of weaknesses in his game. And Phil Hawes doesn't have any of those similar weaknesses that Ahoyo does.
So Antonio Hoyo, people forget, he was the guy that was brought in to kind of replicate Thiago Santos for a lot of different fighters in their camps in the stand-up. Only in the stand-up. And it's not like Thiago Santos, some world beater on the ground. Neither is Antonio Hoyo.
You question the black belt of Thiago Santos? Maheta?
Especially defensively. Now, for Phil Hawes, offensive wrestling is a specialty for sure. Sometimes he's happy with his hands. It's like if Tony Gravely got bigger, but also had a weaker chin.
He got boxed in by Gerald Mearshart, though, and that's an extremely concerning sign.
But when we do have a look at Phil Hawes, and I mean, especially in the UFC, beats Malkoun in his debut. He beats Nasruddin Imavov. That was a very close fight. He beats Kyle Daukaus, and then his last time out, he loses to Chris Curtis. Took that fight on short notice. Was originally due to Deron Winn. When I look at this fight, similarly to how I looked at it before, I mean, for Winn, how do you beat him? You just have to be a step ahead of him, especially when it comes to his specialties. If you can negate some of those wrestling offensive, the takedown that he's able to get, and he will chain some together, but there's a point where it's like a dog on a bone, but the dog is chasing a bone that's on a stick, and you really can't get at it. I think for Phil Hawes, he's going to have success in this fight, and I know there's a lot of really big favorites on this card, so take that for what it's worth, but I do have Phil Hawes in this case.
I also have Phil Hawes in this fight, but I'm going to throw up a couple warning signs, just if you are Phil Hawes, or if you're a big believer in Phil Hawes. Not like he's going to take my opinion into consideration, and I don't blame him whatsoever. Deron Winn does throw very heavy on the inside with his boxing combinations. He is somebody who will throw an insane amount of volume if he is going to have a little bit of success. He does start to roll downhill if he is able to get his hands going. And I know Eric Spicely's not the greatest fighter in the world, but if you even go back to the Eric Spicely fight, I believe he had set a record at the time for significant strikes landed in a middleweight fight. And that is very significant. For Phil Hawes, he's a pretty good wrestler. I think we can all agree on that. He's got good power in his hands. He's a pretty good boxer. He throws a good leg kick. He doesn't have the strongest chin of all all time. That has been his Achilles heel in the past. So let's say he is on the inside in some of these exchanges with Winn. Their wrestling kind of cancels each other out, and Phil Hawes is on the outside. He's starting to tire as the fight goes on. Maybe Winn is able to land some looping shot in like the third round, but other than that, I do think Phil Hawes is the much more technically sound fighter.
Yeah, if you're going to bet anything on this, bet that I'm going to be sitting there watching it, drinking another Miller High Life, and that's about the only bet I'd feel comfortable.
Is Miller High Life paying you under the table?
No,
just
but
big
I wish they were. I'm taking a 50-year-old's approach to this thing. Matt, both of us going with Phil Hawes to get the win. It should be a fight that will happen. See what I did there? Phil Hawes to get the win. Oh, it's going to be a big-time one. And we have a big-time main event. Calvin Kattar taking on Josh Emmett in that main event. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say,
let's get into it.
Coming up this weekend, we have the what are we doing here type of fight. It's Cody Stamann taking on Eddie Wineland, a marquee matchup of bantamweight fighters. And for Eddie Wineland, he's probably getting that contract slid across the table, signing it as quickly as possible because he doesn't have to take on another young striker with power in their hands. For Cody Stamann, likewise, he's not taking on another younger wrestler who can beat him in all the ground skill spots that he's been beaten in his last 3 fights. I mean, for Cody Stamann, this guy was kind of like the outside hotness, and right now he's 1-3 with a draw, albeit to Song Yadong in his last 5 fights. For Eddie Wineland, 1-4, his one win over Gregory Popov, who went 0-2 and then went bye-bye to the UFC. And I look at Eddie Wineland as one of those guys that he's on the edge of like the MMA Hall of Fame, but you kind of look at it and you go like, well, he's more like a Burt Blyleven type of Hall of Famer than anything. 6-9 in the UFC. He lost his one UFC title fight. It was an interim shot against Mr. Hennebrow, arguably the greatest bantamweight of all time. Nobody can ever take that away from him. But in that fight, he did get knocked out. His UFC record, again, it's in the negative. WEC champ. He was one time, and then he lost the belt after that. But if you do look at Eddie Wineland, he is forever an action type of fighter. You can see it from the picture there where he grew out his Red Dead Redemption mustache. He's all about having a good time. He's a very long-rangey boxer. He's a fun guy, and he has some pop at the end of his own shots. And again, I know he's lost 4 of his last 5 total fights, but in those fights, always something interesting. I mean, he took the sexy Mexi down his last time out, John Castaneda, before he ended up getting finished at the end of the first round in that one. But again, I look at Eddie Wineland as one of those guys that his ability to take a shot might not be there like it did when he was a younger man. For Cody Stamann, I mean, doesn't have the fastest hands. We've always known that. But then Merab's taking him down. Then Jimmy Rivera's taking him down and kind of beating him to the punch. And his last time out for Cody Stamann, he got caught by a super slick Said Nurmagomedov in a spot where, hey, it's like Cody's going to have some success. Oh boy, he just rolled right into that. Yikes. So a good opportunity for both these guys. Obviously a clash of styles, but little bit of an odd one, and it feels like they want to get, well, obviously, one of these guys kind of back on the horse.
Oh, without a doubt. It is kind of wild, though, that Cody Stamann is already 32 years of age, because it does feel like he's been in that prospect role at the bantamweight division for quite some time now. Like, I can remember all the way back when he fought Tom Duquesnoy to a split decision, and that was one of those fights to kind of say, ooh, who's going to be the next big prospect in the division? But the good thing for Cody Stamann is, if you do look at his last 5 fights, they are against some of the better fighters in the division. Like you mentioned, the Song Yadong fight, Said Nurmagomedov. Like, these are very, very good fighters, so it's not the biggest deal that he is on the losing streak. The biggest problem for Cody Stamann is that he just hasn't really evolved throughout his UFC tenure. The things he was good at when he first came in, he's still very good at those things and still very much relies on them.
The only time we've seen Cody Stamann really work
if you bring up the Brian Kelleher fight,
was his last win against Brian Kelleher. And again, heavy hearts. His brother just passed away. They made that a focal point of the build-up. And then after the fact, of course, he was very emotional. But again, since that time, we haven't really seen Stamann have much success with his hands. He's kind of gotten back to his old ways.
But even in that fight, it's not like he's like beating him up like he's Conor McGregor in his prime. Like, Cody Stamann's very stiff on the feet, and that's not something that has really shifted throughout his career. Yes, he's been able to maybe mix punches together more effectively at some points throughout his career rather than others, but still, I don't look at Cody Stamann and think, wow, he has been an evolved mixed martial artist at this stage of his career. And here's the weird thing about Cody Stamann. I think you'll appreciate this. Do you know whose career I get reminded of a lot when I think about Cody Stamann's? A much bigger guy who's now in Bellator. He's kind of like Corey Anderson. I could see Cody Stamann going to Bellator and becoming their champ, honestly. I just think in the UFC, he's come up against a lot of very poor matchups. I do think he is a good fighter who does have promise in his future. I just think he's run up against guys who stylistically have had the answer to the questions that he does pose. Because for Stamann, if you are able to defend that takedown or take him down, he's not great defensively off his back. His grappling is almost like a Sarah McMahon's, to where it's phenomenal offensively, but defensively it's almost like a turtle if you roll it over. And for Stamann, he does have really good cardio, and I do think that's going to be the key to this fight, because if Eddie Wineland's able to defend a takedown early in this fight, that's great for him. I just don't think he's going to be able to keep it up round after round, minute after minute against a guy like Stamann. But Wineland will be the more fluid guy on his feet. I do think he'll land a couple of shots. I liken him a little bit to like Tim Means later on in this card. There's some vets in their career who, as they get a little bit older, yes, they start to pile up in losses, but their losses are by decision. They might fight in a more safe way, they don't take a lot of damage. Guys like Eddie Wineland, Tim Means, Matt Brown, they might have more losses than wins, but at this stage in their career, they go for it at the end of, or at the beginning of fights. They're not just going to hold on and lose a very one-sided decision. They're going to go for it, and they might get knocked out as a result. So I do think Eddie Wineland's going to bring the fight to Cody Stamann. I just don't think it's going to be a sustainable approach.
More losses than win. What do we have? Artem Lobov out there? No, I know what you mean. Against the higher level, and especially recently. The interesting thing for Eddie Wineland, too, if you really do look at it, you consider his takedown defense, and he's had so many fights, WEC, UFC. So I went back through. Frankie Saenz took him down once. That was a fight of the night. If you do look at it, I mean, who else? Uriah Faber took him down a couple times, and Beeb took him down to win that WEC belt 5 times. That was the kind of the conversation of the fight, because Wineland had a knockdown very early, and then he was just taken down at will. And for Wineland, high school wrestling background, something he's always worked on, but his boxing is really what gets it done for him. And he's one of those guys that can do such a good job of boxing on the outside, kind of like Calvin Kattar does now. Eddie Wineland can do it. It's just Kattar can really withstand every single punch thrown at him. And Eddie Wineland, sometimes there's some cracks in the armor. So we have a look at the odds for this fight. I mean, Cody Stamann opened to -275. He's at -475 right now. So the line's really jumped on Cody Stamann. For Wineland, open to +235. +346. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprise to us as they will be to you. But I'm going to say over under 90% Stamann.
It should be. Yeah, I'll say over.
It's 96% Cody Stamann, 944 total votes, 71% by decision, 18% by knockout for the 4% that have Wineland, 45% by knockout, 37% by decision. I think Cody Stamann gets a win here, gets a decision win over Eddie Wineland. I don't think anything bad happens. I think it's a good send-off for Eddie Wineland.
It's not going to be a sexy win by any means, and that's the thing for Cody Stamann. You got to be entertaining at a certain point. I hate to say it because, like, sports, the wins do matter more than the losses. But in this sport, the popularity also does matter, whether you like it or not. And for Cody Stamann, his fighting style does not attract many fans. To quote the great Chael Sonnen, no one's ever canceled their Saturday plans because, Cody Stamann's fighting. So I do feel like mentally it is going to matter where Cody Stamann is in his career. Does he think he can get back into the top 15? Because he is going to need this win over Eddie Wineland if he does even want to stay in the company, especially if he wants to get back into the rankings. But I do agree. I think Stamann will have a dominant win, and hopefully it won't damage Eddie Wineland too much.
Matt throwing a ton of shade at the small town of Sparta, Michigan. They are tuning in on a Saturday night to watch Cody Stamann fight. Both of us going with the Spartan. Cody Stamann to get the win. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have. Can Wineland turn back the clock? I mean, Burt Blyleven was able to get 300 wins and 250 losses, and he pitched for decades, and we'll see if Wineland can get something like that. But again, both of us with the Spartans. Some big-time fights on this card. Our main event at 145 pounds. Josh Emmett looking to really just shout out and beat old Calvin Kattar. Can't wait for it. Keep locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.
Coming up this weekend, a couple of strawweights that are definitely in need of some wins. They're leaving Brazil to meet in Austin. We had the Spider Girl, Maria Oliveira, taking on Gloria, De Paula, and Matt. There's some nicknames out there in MMA that give me pause, they give me trouble, like the prospect Nathaniel Wood. That was one that I could think of. Twinkle Toes for Frank Trigg when he went with that one.
Beast in 25-8 is the all-time great.
But Spider Girl Maria Oliveira, so I did a deep dive on this one. So realistically, she had a quotable that was out there. It's on the UFC.com page. It was given to me by a promoter in Japan because of my physical and stylistic similarities to the great Anderson Silva.
Excuse me?
Are they fucking blind?
Did Stevie Wonder give her that nickname?
I'm thinking about it in my head as I'm writing this stuff 0-3, UFC 2-3. Last 5 mates, look out. Here comes the Spider Girl. It's so bad. All I can think about is cringe Maria Oliveira, ladies and gentlemen. It's bad.
You can feel it all over. This is a strange fight in this division. Here's the thing, too. I'm just peeking down to the graphic. They have both these fighters listed at 5'5", but I gotta be honest. In my mind's eye, I do believe Gloria Paula is going to be the bigger fighter physically.
Really?
I do think so. I do feel like she is the stronger fighter, at least in this matchup. And I do think that's really going to matter because if she is able to get on the inside and use her physicality, I do think she's going to negate at least some of the strengths that Maria Oliveira does bring into the cage. Because if Oliveira is able to start getting some of her distance strikes going, I do think it will help her a little bit, but at some point they are going to crash that distance. And that's the thing about Oliveira. She will just sort of crash forward at a certain point. I do think somebody like Gloria Paula is going to be able to use her clinch, get the underhooks, get it to the cage, get it to the ground. Because with Paula, and again, I could be wrong, and by the time they do weigh in, maybe I'm completely off, and Maria Oliveira looks like Stefan Struve against her. But I do think Gloria Paula is going to be able to use her size and her physicality and her superior clinch work to really go to work in this fight. But again, this fight's not one that we ever thought was going to be on the Fight of the Night screen, I don't think.
No, it's funny. I didn't hear a Brazilian promoter say that, but a Dutch promoter did. They said Maria Oliveira, she looks just like Stefan Struve. She's got all those physical gifts, really uses her range well. What a fucking terrible way to sell that. You look at Maria Oliveira, the 5 on in, it is 2-3 in her last 5. She lost to Kana Asakura over with Ryzen. That was the intro, and I played it in Maria Oliveira's debut where the commentators, as she's walking in, are like, yeah, she told us that she's a girly girl. She likes some girly things. And I thought, well, this is going downhill quick. And then, yeah, Maria Oliveira...
Talk about her skills, though.
Wasn't able to defend takedowns. She really had a hard time in that fight. Lost by submission. Then, for some reason, Dana White's Contender Series thought, hey, we're sadists. Let's bring in a fighter who just lost the fight. And she took on Marina Rodrigues. And in that fight...
How did that fight go, Craig?
Marina's punching her face in up against the cage until Maria runs away and goes, nope. And she loses that fight by TKO because she didn't want to fight.
To be fair, if I fought Marina Rodrigues, the result would probably be very similar.
I know this sounds very critical, but again, you do have a fighter, Maria Oliveira. She goes out there, she fights with a small-time promotion over in Brazil, 2019, against Diuli Duarte, who was 0-1. Oliveira at the time was 10-4. Then Oliveira goes out and fights Emilia and they had her as Anila Emily if you look her up on YouTube to watch the fight, but Anila Tabosa is what they have her on Tapology. A debuting fighter, and she beats her by, it says punches on Tapology, but it was knees in the clinch. And then Anila Emily goes, no mas, I'm done. So then they give her a fight in the UFC. This is one of the more perplexing signings I've ever seen in the UFC.
I would agree with that.
And for Maria Oliveira, when things are going well, it is a good clinch game. She has really good knees. When she's out from distance, she's not a very accurate striker. She'll
get busy, though.
There's another fighter that's on this card that does the same thing. Oliveira will stop playing pitter-patter. She'll plant her feet. She'll throw from her hips, which completely throws defense out the window. So, I don't know. I mean, again, she has finished wins. She has a little bit of power. I wasn't necessarily overly impressed on the way into the UFC. She's a very reactive fighter. She doesn't have a lot of head movement either. And when I look at Gloria Paula, this is a 6-4 fighter who lost her first 2 fights in the UFC. She was a minus 190 to beat Jinyu Fry. She lost that fight. She was an underdog her next time out that she lost to Cheyenne Vlismas, where she got finished. And then she took on Diana Belbizia her last time out. You can make an argument either way. I'm partial to whatever you want to say, but to me, I thought that it was DePaula able to get the win there. MMA decision, 6-29-28 for DePaula, 5-29-28 Belbizia, and 1 scored at 30-27 Belbizia. But all I will say is style for style, Gloria DePaula moves well on the feet, moves well in and out, moves well side to side, throws in combination, does get hit a fair bit. But for DePaula, I just think it's like if you turn Maria Oliveira's strengths up just a notch. That's what you have in DePaula.
The way you described Maria Oliveira was like how people describe DeAndre Jordan's playoff minutes. They're like, hey, we just hope that he can keep it together long enough for Joel Embiid to get back on the court and hope the other team doesn't go on a crazy run. You're right. With Oliveira, there's so many weaknesses to her game that they do sort of overshine her strengths, because if she is going to have success in this fight, I do agree. Gloria Paula is almost just going to have to stand still in the middle of the cage and allow herself to get hit and just keep on going back to the same poor positions, because when they are in that mid-range, I could see Oliveira playing both games, having success with her volume, having some success with her power shots, but I still think DePaula's whole game plan, she can get the fight to the ground. She can fight more effectively on the feet, and I do think DePaula's game is going to be more suited to going later on into this fight, because I don't think Oliveira is going to have the cardio with her style to be able to match DePaula, especially with her takedown defense in the later second and third round.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, Oliveira's a fighter out of PRVT, you know, that gym for Jessica Andrade and so on and so forth. And I looked at it again when you're really running through it. BJJ World Champ by CBJJO and a national champion. But I've never seen her really look all that impressive off of the ground. Like, it's one of those things. You also look at her pre-UFC wins, level of competition, combined record 8-17 out of those 12 wins. So it wasn't the best level of competition. Not to say that 6-4 Gloria DePaula is any world beater, like that old Greg Allman song, I'm No Angel. But I do look at this one, Matt. You have a look at the odds. It's a little bit silly, but Gloria DePaula open a -175 favorite. And you know what happened? Somebody took a juicer and they squeezed that sucker. -264. We have a look at Oliveira, open to +150, +208. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprise us there to you. I'm going to say over under 75% to Paula.
I'll say under.
I'm going to say under, slightly over, 862 total votes, 78% to Paula, 92% by decision for the 22% that have Oliveira, 79% by decision. Matt, I think Gloria DePaula wins this fight, if I haven't said that already.
If you gotta go to the fridge, if you gotta use the bathroom, if you need additional snacks, if you're making a spin dip perhaps that's gonna take a little bit of prep, this would be the fight to accomplish all of those tasks. I have Gloria DePaula, but this isn't going to be fight of the year by any means.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to the high life again off of this one, but both of us going with Brazil's Gloria DePaula to get the win. Matt, we have some big-time fights left on this card. Up in that main event slot, Calvin Kattar, he is the Boston Bird friend. He's going to be taking on a big-time fighter in Josh Emmett. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say,
let's get into it.
Big-time fight coming up this weekend. We have a couple of very interesting fighters in Brazil's Ricardo Ramos. She's taking on the Colombian warrior, Danny Chavez. Matt, you had a great read on Danny Chavez making his UFC debut. He's taking on TJ Brown. You took Chavez to win the fight. Who would have thought Chavez was going to be taking Danny Brown? Yeah, he's taking Danny Brown down to Detroit and rapping and having a good time. But he was taking TJ Brown down, and Brown, I know he's one of those guys, he tends to get tired in his fights, but a big one for Chavez. He went out, he lost his next fight, he was taking on Jared Gordon, a guy who can cancel out the best fighters on certain days, and then his next time out, draw, and that was a weird one against Kai Kamaka, where even though there was a point deducted due to a low blow for Kamaka, a lot of people thought that Kamaka won that fight, albeit the judges ended up at a draw for the decision. For Ramos, though, this is one of the more interesting guys that I think we've seen in the UFC in a long time. He came in off of Dana White's looking for a fight. New England Fights Edition. They were in Maine. Ramos was just 21. He gets a win over Alfred Kashakian, who is in the, I guess, the Zagat guide of the zeitgeist, I guess, of MMA fans, because he's fought some names in the past, notably Sean O'Malley as well, so that's interesting. But for Ramos, he was able to parlay that into a very, very good run to kick off his UFC career. Plenty of knockdowns at the start. He had that spinning back fist win over Ayman Zahabi. But you look at it now, 6-3, still a very respectable UFC record. He's got some bonuses, performance bonuses over Zahabi, as well as Eduardo Gregory, a guy who I don't think the highest of, but Eduardo Gregory, a fighter in the UFC. For Ramos, she did lose his last time out. That was a tricky one against Zubaira Tukhugov. He also has a loss against Lauren Murphy by finish, but wins over Bill Algeo, Eduardo Gregory, and Journey Newsome are some of the recent ones to round it out. Matt, safe to say both guys really need a win. Both guys also have added dimensions to their game because you look at them, these guys are strikers, but really both guys actually happen to be Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts. And for Danny Chavez, earned his under Daniel Valverde at MMA Masters. Daniel Valverde, big time judo and jiu-jitsu guy in his own right. So I think this is going to be a fun fight. There's a lot of different layers to this fight, and I know you're excited about it too.
I am really excited for this fight because, like you said, if we get 15 minutes of striking, this could be a great fight. If we get 15 minutes of grappling, this could be a pretty great fight. Even if we get 15 minutes of just like clinch work between these guys, it won't be great, but it would be better than 15 minutes of clinch work between the majority of fighters because they do like to get the majority of their work done on the feet, but they can go to their plan B or plan C, which is what you really like out of unranked fighters especially, because like you had said leading into this video, there's only 2 ranked fighters on this card, but I think you look at some of the matchups, and a lot of these fighters match up with each other better than a lot of most ranked opponents would match up with each other, because for Ramos, we've seen him look really good, but we've yet to see him look great. It's almost like Jason Tatum in the finals so far. It's like, hey, we're sort of waiting for you to explode. And that's the thing about Ramos. I rate him quite highly because I rate Lerone Murphy extremely highly, and I would say Murphy's best win up until this point still probably is Ramos because he dominated him in that matchup. And I think Ramos is a really good fighter because he's dynamic on the feet. He will throw spinning stuff like we've seen in the past, but he can be more of a traditional striker too and throw more of a 1-2. The only thing out of Ramos that I don't love, it's almost the Jonathan Martinez effect. He can get caught just sort of standing there at range, and he is sort of a hittable guy. He doesn't have the best head movement. He doesn't have the best even hand defense either. So if you are a very fast striker on the outside, you can blitz him very fast, and he doesn't have a great reaction to it. It's a lot of just kind of running backwards, not really knowing what to do. And we have seen multiple opponents have success against Ramos when they just pressure him a lot in their fights. Now, that's easier said than done. He has elbows, he has knees. He's a very dangerous fighter even on the retreat, but that's where we have seen a lot of opponents have success. And with Danny Chavez trying to get back to the form that he was able to show in that TJ Brown fight, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more takedowns out of Chavez if he did try to test at least the takedown defense out of Ramos. Now, I'm not here to recommend he gets into these lengthy exchanges with Ramos on the mat, but I do think Chavez could have success if he at least put that question mark in Ramos' mind.
Well, that's to me the same thing to me. I mean, I look at Danny Chavez as a guy that can really enter into the wrestling, but it tends to tire him out. I look at it for Ramos as he made that move to Team Alpha Male a long time ago. Now, this camp, I want to mention it, you look on his Instagram, doesn't look like he's been in California at all. He's been down in Brazil. He's been training at a home gym. So I made that a placeholder in the graphics of Team Alpha Male. But it looks like he's been working primarily his striking on the IG. So maybe Chavez wants to do that. But a guy that's 35 and 145 pounds, I know he got into MMA late. He had some layoffs as well. So that's kind of the reason why we're here right now at 11-4-1. But I do look at Chavez as a guy that's really going to expend that gas tank. Ramos, only 26. When he does work it in, it's not to a huge detriment of he loses, he completely throws out his striking defense out the window. So I do look at this one. You look at the odds. Another fight where there's a giant favorite. Ramos open to minus 310 favorite, minus 320 right now. For Danny Chavez, open to plus 260. Plus 245, so I guess the odds don't really make a whole lot of sense there, but you get the point. One's a favorite, one is an underdog, and it is that much so, Matt. Not a surprise, because I scrolled down on our Tapology page, but 90% of the fans have Ramos to win, 81% by decision. For the 10% that have Chavez, 58% by decision, 27% by knockout. So again, it's one of those fights that added dimensions from either fighter. It's just who can really make that one thing count. For me, I like the length, I like the size, I like the youth for Ricardo Ramos. I think he's going to be able to get the win because he has a higher work rate.
This fight this weekend reminds me a lot of the Jack Della Maddalena fight versus Ramazan Amid. You have a younger guy who's a bigger favorite against sort of a more well-rounded guy in Danny Chavez. The difference is Chavez, I just don't think he's going to be able to withstand, like you said, the pressure of Ramos. I do think that's a really good point that you bring up about his age at this weight division. Here's what I will say, though. We are going to talk about a few other guys on this card who are a little bit older, still competing. I don't look at Chavez and worry about his durability at this age, though, because he hasn't taken a ton of damage throughout his career. He does only have, 16 fights? So it's not like he has been in these crazy wars. And like you mentioned, he does have some time off, too. So for Chavez, I do worry about his gas tank in this matchup especially, but I'm not too concerned about his durability. I think on the feet, this will be a very fun fight, but I do like Ramos' ability to mix it up.
Yeah, and I mean, for Danny Chavez, one weird thing before we let you go, this one that you can kind of keep in your back pocket, he is a guy with 11 wins, 8 of them, or 7 of them are by decision, 4 of them are by knockout. He won 3 fights by knockout to get his way into the UFC. Little bit of an anomaly. He is a good kickboxer. He does have more of a high tie stance when he does fight, but it's just an odd one because you see him go for more of these takedowns, so on and so forth. And a guy like Kai Kamaka was really able to stuff all of the good things out of Danny Chavez, parlay that into losing his next fight, ending up in Bellator, and looking like a world beater again. So Kai Kamaka III, a fun guy to watch.
World beater's a bit of a shit.
In this fight, though, both of us going with Brazil's Ricardo Ramos should get the win. Let us know down below in the comment section whether you have Ramos or the Colombian Warrior. In Danny Chavez, we have a big-time fight in the main event in this weight class of featherweight. Calvin Kattar taking on Josh Emmett. You're not going to want to miss this. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Coming up this weekend, the former Ultimate Fighter Season 11 winner, back when it was on Spike TV. Back when Spike TV was hitting you with shows like Mansers, Pros vs. Joes, and 1,000 Ways to Die. Well, Court McGee, he's looking to do it again. He's looking to turn back another up-and-comer in this welterweight division. And I've got a lot of crazy things to say about Court McGee, none of which are that he's like the nicest guy in all of MMA. That has to be said. But for Court McGee, it's just wild. Like, you look at his overall UFC record, it's 10-8 since he won the show, or including the time that he won the show. He's only been finished one time in his whole career. It was by Santiago Ponzinibbio. Never been submitted. Only been TKO'd. And it's been crazy to look at his last two fights. He beat Ramiz Brahimaj his last time out. Do you want to pepper in a 10-8? I don't care. You could. He beat Claudio Silva before that. Some losses. Carlos Condit, Sean Brady, Diego Lima. But you look at Court McGee today. You look at Court McGee in 2011. Fight in, fight out. You know exactly what you're going to get out of Crusher McGee, right, Matt?
You really do. He's going to pressure forward with some fairly basic boxing combinations, if we're all being honest. Not much of a kicker, which has always sort of been the kryptonite of Court McGee. If you're a great distance striker who has good footwork, you're kind of built to beat somebody like McGee, who just kind of plods forward. And listen, I think everybody enjoys watching Court McGee fight. I know he's not really a finish-heavy fighter, but still, his fights normally are quite entertaining because he does eat a few shots before he is able to get into the range where he has the most success. But the real question you have to ask yourself, or what your trainer should be asking you if you're about to sign the bout agreement for a Court McGee fight, is, hey, do you own a treadmill? Because you better if you fight Court McGee. I couldn't imagine how exhausted you must feel after fighting to a decision with a guy like Court McGee, because the pressure he's able to put on guys from the first minute to the last minute of a fight is continuous. And it doesn't matter how many shots he's eaten, he's still going to march forward no matter what. And this fight against Jeremiah Wells is going to be interesting, because if he isn't able to get this fight to the mat, I do worry about McGee's ability, especially at that kicking range, because it's not like Wells is Yair Rodriguez at range, but he will go to the body and he will go to the legs quite a bit. And those are going to be two tools that are definitely going to slow down Court McGee and his two massive advantages in this fight, which is not really his footwork in a fancy kind of way, but his footwork and just his pressure in general. Those things are heavily reliant on his own cardio. And if he does start to get his legs and body start to beat away at a little bit, it will start to slow Court McGee down, which isn't something I ever thought I'd say. But at 37 years of age, we do have to expect a decline in his cardio at some point. But who am I? Maybe he'll just never get tired till he's like 45. He'll just keep on fighting to decisions every 6 months.
Court McGee got a knockdown his last time out against Ramiz Brahimaj early. Whoever thought that was going to happen? And you do look at it for McGee. Career win over Brad Tavares on the show, The Ultimate Fighter. Again, same network that had Mansers, and he also has a win by split decision over Robert Whittaker. You know, all-time middleweight.
Shaq Versus was my favorite Spike TV show.
Lots of wild stuff. What was the other one? Deadliest Warrior? That was another
Deadliest
one.
Warrior, Ink Masters, Bar Rescue. Like, Spike TV had a run that you could put up against anybody's for about a 3-year stretch.
And then they added Bellator, and then it became Paramount. Either way, we're not here for the history of Spike. We're going to talk about Jeremiah Wells. This guy, former CES and CFFC welterweight champ. You look at it, inside of a calendar year in the UFC, 2 wins, both of them by finish. And I mean, listen, a big time win against Warlley Alves, where he decided to throw caution to the wind, put his head and his arms out there, and just was able to land them tangs, as Shannon Sharp would say, on Warlley Alves. Finished him in that one. Took on Blood Diamond his last time out. Matt, I hope you went back and watched that fight, but in the first 5 seconds, what in the flying fuck was he doing?
Jeremiah Wells' controller got disconnected, and he just started, like, walking towards not really. He jogged, forgot where he was, fell into the cage, and then immediately won the fight, luckily. But I was worried that Jeremiah Wells was, like, something seriously. Remember Andre Fiallo? This isn't something we should joke about, because he seriously had, like, a breakdown in the middle of the Chael Sonnen fight, but I was worried.
Chael Sonnen fight?
You don't remember that? Yeah.
I just said
Sonnen?
Andrea Fiallo.
Sorry, Andre. Who was the guy who was considered the best middleweight in the world? I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. Chael Sonnen fought him in WEC. Andre Fialio, I'm almost certain was his name. We can look this up as Craig has a keyboard next to him.
Go ahead.
But anyways, he had this breakdown in the middle of the cage. Warley Alves had a performance I remember that was really odd in the UFC. It was just weird. Every now and then you get a case where it's just something weird happens in the cage. And Jeremiah Wells, for whatever reason, decided to sprint headfirst into the cage and then proceeded to beat the brakes off Blood Diamond. So it really depends on how much stock you put into that fight and how highly you did regard Blood Diamond back
Paulo Filo?
Paulo Filo, thank you.
You don't have to shout in our ears.
Paulo Filo, okay, Craig, of all the people. Paulo Filo at the time was considered the best middleweight in the world, but when he fought Chael Sonnen, and Chael Sonnen considers this his best win, it's very off-putting to go back and watch that fight. Filo's talking to people who aren't even there, not even paying attention to Chael Sonnen. It's a very, very strange performance, but that's what I thought we were getting into when Jeremiah Wells had his weird controller disconnect.
Yeah, he ran into the cage, grabbed it, and then turned around. Blood Diamond's coming at him, but again, in that fight, Blood Diamond went, and I want to make sure I get it right. 1 of 3 in total strikes. He got taken down, ridden out for the whole round, and Wells was able to get the submission. Jeremiah Wells is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Now, listen, both these guys very accredited in Jiu-Jitsu, but for Wells, it's under Daniel Gracie at Henzo's in Philly. Sean Brady's at that gym. Sean Brady beat Court McGee, a little bit of a connection. But in this fight, it is odd, because for Court McGee, He plots forward. He's kind of like the man that Randa Marcos would have been at 170 pounds. He kind of keeps his hands...
He fights like the Tin Man.
Right out like this. He lands a couple of shots. He walks you forward. He tries to take you down. Like Randa Marcos had a fun fight against Jessica Penne, so maybe we get that out of Court McGee here. But for McGee, very similar fight in, fight out. Jeremiah Wells is good offensive when he's wrestling. He's good when he's in his set positions. He's not a guy that's going to go, submission over position. He's very much going to try and break you down. And he did wait a long time before he got that Blood Diamond submission, but he was able to land some ground and pound, soften him up. Very cerebral he is when he's in those top positions. When he's on his back, he can struggle. He can also struggle with his takedown defense as well. And when it comes to Wells with the striking, you mentioned it, the leg kicks, the body kicks, and he has good offensive striking, but it's really wonky, and I worry about his gas tank. Both of these guys, I know Wells has much less in terms of fights, but he is 35. He is late in the game. For Court McGee, 37. But Court McGee has a great gas tank, and he preserves it too as fights go on.
It's like if you light a peanut and a marshmallow on fire at the exact same time. The peanut will stay lit for much longer, and the marshmallow is just going to burn out, but it's going to look really bright while it does burn. Jeremiah Wells, the marshmallow in that. He is going to look really good when he does look good, but I do worry about his gas tank, especially in this matchup, because that's really the key anytime you're fighting Court McGee. Again, that is the number one X factor when you're fighting a guy like Court McGee. Before I even think about what that fighter can do offensively to have success, I ask myself, can this fighter compete with Court McGee for 15 minutes? Because he's the type of fighter who can lose 2 rounds and 10-8 you in the third to at least eke out a draw. He's really good at doing stuff like that. So I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think Court McGee's going to go on a 3-fight win streak. And here's the thing about Jeremiah Wells, too, that not a lot of people are bringing up. He's only 2 years younger than Court McGee. This isn't like we have a much younger fighter in one corner and then a much older guy on the other side. Like, Court McGee has much more experience at the highest level, and I do think that's going to pay off.
We got to put you on the replay. I just said that. We just talked about that. We just hit on that. The odds in this fight, though, they're forever going to be in my favor in this one. Now, Court McGee opened to plus 150 as an underdog. Minus 120 is the favorite now. Jeremiah Wells opened to minus 175. Minus 104 as it is. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprise to us there to you. I'm going to say over under 55% Court McGee.
I'll say Wells is the favorite.
You're saying Wells is the favorite? Well, Wells is with the fans. 2 finish wins in a row, I guess. 912 votes, 73% Wells, 54% by decision, 34% by knockout. For the 27% that have Court McGee, 83% by decision. Matt, I think Jeremiah Wells finishes Court McGee. It's only ever happened one time in his whole career. I think it's going to happen for the second time coming up this weekend. I think Jeremiah Wells, again, he has the ability to kick out that lead leg of Court McGee. Court McGee switching stances, not something that's popular in a Court McGee fight. So for me, I do think Wells has that power. I think he also has the ability to get out of some of those bad positions against a guy like McGee. Thought Ramiz Brahimaj would have been able to do the same things in that fight. But again, we saw McGee was able to drop him early in that one and zap his gas tank and then just take over. It was a circle of life type moment. But I do think that Jeremiah Wells is going to be able to get the win against McGee. But again, I do agree with you. Like Court McGee does not go away in some of these fights.
And he fights in a safer way post-losing streak. I think that's the big key that people are kind of missing out on in this fight. Court McGee did make one minor adjustment in between his losing streak and his two most recent fights. He ducks his head more and throws with a little bit more power on the inside, and it has paid off to huge effect because now guys are worried a little bit more when they're backed up against the cage because he can sit down a little bit more on his shots. And I will say this, Court McGee's last 2 wins are not over the best guys in the best stages of their careers, but it's still better than beating Blood Diamond, who really no one has any idea about anyways. And Court McGee and Blood Diamond couldn't be any more different types of opponents. Like, they are polar opposites in every single category you can think of when it comes to mixed martial arts. I like Court McGee in this matchup, but it's kind of wild that I think Court McGee's going to win, but that also means that I think Court McGee's going to win 3 fights in a row at the age of 37, which is crazy if he's able to do so, but this should be a really fun fight.
Matt going with the crusher Court McGee. I'm going to go with the guy who turned Blood Diamond into Mike Mathitha. I'm going with Jeremiah Wells to get the win. We got some big-time fights left on this card, including a fight between Kevin Holland and Tim Means at 170. You got a big-time co-main event between Donald Cerrone and Joe Lozon, and in the main event, oh boy, it is a banger between Calvin Kattar and Josh Emmett. You're not going to want to miss. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. And a welcome to the UFC, to the former Jungle Fights flyweight champ. It's Natalia Silva, set to make her UFC debut. Years on the shelf, she's set to take on Dana White's Contender Series and recently a UFC winner in Canada's Jasmine Jasudavicius. And Matt, I had a lot of fun going back, watching a lot of tape study for this fight for Jasudavicius, her UFC debut. Early on this year, she takes on Kay Hansen. Hansen jumping up from strawweight to flyweight to take that fight. And Jasudavicius stuffed every single thing that Kay Hansen is good at, and she was able to get the win and send Kay Hansen packing. So good for Jasmine Jasudavicius in that one. She did, Jasudavicius, challenge for the CFFC title back some time ago. That was her last loss. If you do look at the 4 on in, that was her only loss. It was almost 2 years ago. Split decision loss to Elise Reed, who is now also in the UFC. But for Jasudavicius, I mean, I went back through 2016 Canada Cup wrestling medalist was she. She won silver and realistically got into MMA a little bit late. Her wrestling coach, Chris Prickett, was going over to PEI to hang out with Jason Sago. Everything really fit like a glove. She has some fights as an amateur, has some fights as a pro, and I get it. She is just turned 33, so she's a little bit older, but not a lot of miles on the clock for Jasudavicius. Now, in taking on Natalia Silva, this is somebody with plenty of finish wins, and if you do look at it, and this is my biggest point, Matt, of her last 7 wins, 6 of them by armbar. You don't necessarily see that working at the elite level. It worked for Ronda Rousey. Doesn't work for everybody else, though. But for Silva, plenty of finish wins on her plate. You do look at her last fight. It was to win that Jungle Fights title. It was against Joyce Mara back 2 years and 4 months ago. It's interesting to note that Silva was signed to the UFC in 2020. She was booked to fight in 2021 against Victoria Leonardo. She broke her ulna, so I'll throw the picture up there on screen. But she hasn't stepped into a cage in 2 years and 4 months. It's been a long time away. She is just 25 years old. So this could be a case where she comes in and she's like a Melissa Gatto and she's added every tool to her belt and she's a great striker now. But Matt, for Natalia Silva, a very interesting fighter coming to the UFC.
And here's the thing too, for every Melissa Gatto, there's also an Ariane Lipski who their highlight reel looks really good. We hear about all these great things that they've done outside the UFC. And then they show up and they're extremely underwhelming. And that's kind of my question with Silva in this matchup, because it's not like Jasmine Jasudavicius is like a borderline ranked fighter by any stretch of the imagination, but she is a fighter who is complete in her skill set. She can strike a little bit. She can definitely wrestle. She has a good gas tank. And those are really the 3 most important things to bring into the cage. I'll be very interested to see if Silva can keep up with and I'm going to say this with a bit of an asterisk, Jasmine Jasudavicius is the more experienced fighter in this matchup. I do believe so. I know she has less fights, but if you do look at her whole career as a mixed martial artist and span how long she's been in wrestling, in boxing, in kickboxing, in MMA training, I do think she's been around the sport for a much longer time. And like you said, she's someone who fought in CFFC, which is a fairly highly ranked organization. We don't normally look at former CFFC fighters and think, wow, who were they?
Chookagian's former CFFC champ.
Exactly. And she's the forever number 2 at the flyweight division, one of the all-time greats. I just think for Silva, this is going to be a fight that's going to either prove a lot of people wrong and really catapult her, not into title contention, but you get the idea. Just get a lot more eyes on her career. Or it's going to be the you are not a contender and you are a pretender, because if she can't defend those takedowns early from Jasmine in this fight, I do not think she's going to be able to get back up to her feet.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. You look at Jasmine Jasudavicius, when she's going to fight her fight, she's really standing at boxing range, working her strikes, moving her head, and then when the fight gets back behind that black line before the cage, she's able to control head position, she's able to work her takedowns. They will be more traditional. When you look at Natalia Silva and she strikes, and I did this like, I wish I could do like some Luke Thomas type things here, but basically, I watched a lot of plant your feet, throw from your hips, throw like your work. It's almost like she's working a brush cutter and she's trying to trim the hedges. Like, she's throwing from here. She completely throws striking defense out the window. And I went back and watched one of her fights. You can find a lot of tape on Natalia Silva. The fight that she had against Ingrid Panda, in that one, it looks like the canvas is a bed sheet. It was just white and like kind of draped there. But in that one, she has one of those moments where she plants and throws. And again, she's only like 21 in that fight. The fight that she had over at Jungle Fights to win the title, she's only like 23, 22. So very, very young in her career. I do expect a progression, but when you look at that fight against Panda, she gets completely crumpled and dropped and falls back. But the weird thing about it is, when we look at Jasudavicius, more, I guess, technical when it comes to her takedowns. For Natalia Silva, she's a very, very good grappler. And once it gets down to the mat, she is very fluid in the positions that she's good at. But when she goes for her own takedowns, it's a lot of body lock into a trip, or maybe she'll go for a judo throw, which works. And I mean, strawweight, flyweight, Montserrat Conejo was able to completely negate anything that Cheyenne Vlismas was good at, because she had a good head and arm throw and could keep her head tight in that position. But when I look at Natalia Silva, she wins this weekend, it would surprise me. I'll put it that way.
Does Natalia Silva have broads in Atlanta?
I don't know.
Designer? No. Come on.
I don't know.
I like Jasmine in this fight. I do. I just think her forward pressure is really going to be the key. Because like you said, in the middle of the cage, she will strike at range. But the second it does start to get close to the cage, she's someone who will close that distance very fast and won't really play the striking game from that point. I like her cardio in this fight. And I do like her ability to chain wrestle a little bit. She will struggle to do that against anybody with like a legitimate wrestling background. But I do think in this matchup, she will be able to get the fight to the mat consistently.
Jasudavicius, another one of these bigger favorites. We're going to sound like broken records here for a bit, but she opened to minus 260, minus 257, thereabouts. Natalia Silva opened plus 220, plus 215, or thereabouts. We have a look at the Topology votes. Surprised us, though, as they might be to you. I'm going to say over under 80% Jasudavicius.
I'll say under.
Going to say under. It's slightly over. 869 total votes, 82% Jasudavicius, 90% by decision for the 18% that have Silva, 47% by submission. I mean, again, for Silva, it looks like, you know, she's throwing lemons from her hips. Like, she has good kicks. She will switch stances a lot, but it feels like a lot of wasted movement. She is light on the balls of her feet, so there is another positive. So if she has kind of made these improvements over the last 2 years, I'm very excited to see them. Again, she was signed in 2020 by the UFC, and she took all of these fights. You look at it right now, 12-5 with a draw. From 2015 to 2019, that's a lot of fights in 4 years. So again, a lot of time off now. You can kind of reset. The level of competition that she took on, maybe not the best out of the wins, but out of the losses, Marina Rodrigues, the real one, and then a loss to Diana Firmino, who's on a lot of people's record as well, especially when you're coming up through that Brazilian regional scene. But again, for me, I do like Jasudavicius here.
So do I. And for Natalia Silva, let's say she does look good in a loss, then maybe it will kind of correct what I think about her. But like you said, on her record, a lot of her wins are over subpar levels of competition, if we're all being honest. So she does have quite a bit to prove in this fight, in my mind at least.
It'll be an interesting fight. Can Natalia Silva kind of take some of that energy that we saw from Karina Silva, who just made her UFC debut and got a big win over Poliana Batalio? Or will she look like a fighter whose wins were a combined 11-7 overall, and then you factor in the 10-5 her last time out against Mara? It'll be an interesting fight nonetheless. Both of us going with Canada's own Jasmine Jasudavicius to get the win. We get some big-time fights left on this card, including Tim Means taking on Kevin Holland. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Coming up this weekend, we have an absolute banger at bantamweight. Adrian Yanez taking on Tony Kelley, who's going to try his best to make Uncle Jack's hands look normal and prove to Uncle Jack that regular-sized hands can get a win inside of the UFC's octagon.
Oh my God, nobody look! Nobody look! Nobody look!
And for Kelley, he's on a tidy little 2-fight win streak. Win over Ali Al-Khazi, and then a big-time win over Randy Costa in a fight where he drove 21 hours from Louisiana to Vegas to get into a fist fight, and he was able to break down Randy Costa and finish him in the second round. He looked very, very good in that fight. Didn't look so great when he was a corner for Andrea Lea's last time out. Maybe he was misquoted. Maybe he misspoke. Those are things that have been said in the past. I don't know. But the direct quote out of that one, Matt, is, that's what they're going to do. They're dirty Brazilians. And he said that. I'm quoting it. That's not great stuff to say. But for Tony Kelley, I did listen to an interesting interview that came out today. It dropped on Monday. He did it with Gabriel Gonzalez, who's just doing the Lord's work over there with Cage Side Press. And this was the direct quotable out of Tony Kelley. And the crazy part is, Matt, before Kelley's fight against Randy Costa, I listened to an interview. I mentioned it in the show. I said, hey, Tony Kelley, hurt his jab shoulder. He throws a lot of jabs with his lead arm. And what did he do in the Randy Costa fight? Well, he switched stances a whole lot. He blitzed forward. He tried to clinch. And he threw a lot of kicks. This is what Tony Kelley said in an interview that dropped just today. And I'm going to throw it out there. Man, honestly, I'm not even cleared until July. I've had some issues. I tore my rotator cuff. I'm not even cleared until July. I wanted the fight. They offered this fight. To me, I accepted this fight. Well, then how can he even fight? And who cleared him for it? So clearly, I'm assuming.
Things are different in Austin.
This is an assumption that it might be the same arm that he's dealing with, because he did have injuries, rotator cuff injuries, before he fought Randy Costa, and he finished Randy Costa. So now he's going to be taking on Adrian Yanez. These two have kind of been going at it on Twitter since the fight was announced. Tony Kelley even called for a fight against Adrian Yanez after he had beaten Randy Costa because of the connection, because Yanez had beaten Costa as well. But Matt, I find this fight very interesting because I know there's a lot of fights where the odds are very skewed on this card. This is another one of those fights, but Adrian Yanez, fight against Randy Costa, got his ears boxed in the first round. Came back in the second round and finished him. His last fight against Davy Grant withstood a lot of adversity in that one too. If you look at it for Yanez, all of his wins in the UFC are bonuses. So he is a bonus machine. I think this is going to be a very, very good fight, but I don't think people should really overlook Tony Kelley all that much in a matchup like this one.
You just told us he might have a torn rotator cuff, though.
I just said, man, honestly, I'm not even cleared until July. He's going to be fighting in June.
It's just, that was a lot of red flags to throw up before you say, well, Tony Kelley's got a great chance. That's all. This is a tough stylistic fight for Tony Kelley, and this is why I think so. Tony Kelley, at least on the feet, is going to fight in a very similar way of Adrian Yanez. They're both going to rely more on their boxing. Now, Tony Kelley is going to mix in more kicks than Adrian Yanez will, because Yanez is almost primarily a boxer. He'll throw an inside leg kick every now and then to off-balance his opponent, but for the most part, he likes long-distance boxing combinations. He'll go to the body and he'll go to the head. Tony Kelley relies on a lot of those exact same tools, and my issue is, think back to when Carla Esparza fought Tatiana Suarez. You have two fighters who, really, if you're just breaking down what they do and how they express their martial arts, they do all the exact same stuff. But one fighter is just turned up a little bit more in some of those areas, and it turns into an extremely one-sided fight because both the fighters like their, at least offense in similar ways. If Tony Kelley shows up to this fight thinking, hey, I'm going to be able to use my jab and it won't get countered, I'm going to be quick on my feet, get inside and outside, he's probably going to get lit up in the boxing range, because even with Yanez, go back and watch the Costa fight. Yes, he is having adversity in that first round, but nobody can fight at the pace Costa did for the first round for 3 rounds. It's almost impossible. Costa fought at such a ridiculous pace for that 1 round that it was almost like, hey, if I don't get him out of here in round 1, I'm kind of screwed after that. We saw Yanez immediately after that first round, the tide completely shifted in his manner. He landed 1 clean body shot. It completely sat the energy out of Costa, and then he finished him with a really nice combination up against the cage. I do think Kelley's going to offer much more resistance than Randy Costa did, because Kelley does have a much better gas tank, I would say. He's a more well-rounded guy. I think he has a much better chin than Costa, because, and I hate saying this, but with Costa, like, it's not like he got hit in the chin and got completely flatlined against Adrian Yanez. Like, he ate a body shot and went down. Like, when the going gets tough, you don't always think Randy Costa is going to get tough with it, is what I'm trying to say. I think Tony Kelley, you have to completely spark him out if you're going to try to beat him by finish. So I do see this fight going late, and I do think that favors Adrian Yanez, who, up until this point, yes, he's shown some defensive liabilities throughout his fights, but there is yet to be that one massive, dam breaching issue with his style. Now, Tony Kelley, with his well-rounded ability, may be able to show us a crack in the armor of Yanez, but up until this point, I do feel like if Tony Kelley fights in a way that he has fought in the past, Yanez stylistically is just slightly better in a lot of the same categories.
Yeah, I mean, Ali Alkazi was able to work in some of the takedowns, wrestling obviously his strong suit, and he's gone back to the regional scene. He's had some success, so we'll see if maybe Alkazi ends up back in the UFC, first Jordanian in the UFC. But for Tony Kelley, again, yeah, I do like those kicks, and I do like the fact that he was able to compensate for the shoulder injury in his last fight, because by all accounts, by his own account, it was there, and he was able to mix in a couple of different things. For Yanez, again, we'll see how he deals with some of that adversity, and I do look at it, this is Yanez's first fight out of 18 total fights in Texas. He's never fought at home before. So again, he's a Houston guy. The fight's in Austin, very close by. Shreveport, Louisiana's own Tony Kelley, Louisiana, Texas, getting that flavor in
a shorter
there.
drive than the last one for Tony Kelley.
A shorter drive for sure, and I think you could probably fly right now. You can fly in the States. But you do look at this fight, Matt, Kelley, Yanez, a couple of guys, Julian Lane fight. They're down to bang. We have a look at the odds for this fight. Yanez open to minus 350 favorite, minus 345 or thereabouts. For Tony Kelley, open to plus 285, plus 263 is what Best Fight Odds says. We have a look at the votes on Topology. Surprise to us, they are to you. I'm going to say over under 75% Adrian Yanez.
I'll say over.
You're going to say over. I mean, apparently what I said at the start of this video means nothing. 939 total votes, 95% Yanez, 63% by knockout, 30% by decision. For the 5% that have Kelley, 44% by decision, 46% by knockout. Not often that you see a lot of people thinking bantamweights are going to finish each other by knockout, but that's what the fans see here.
There's so many finishes at bantamweight?
By knockout. By knockout.
Cody Garbrandt, Piotr. There's a lot of guys at bantamweight who can finish by knockout.
There's not a lot of fights where you go, geez, these two bantamweights are going to knock each other out, submit each other. There's so many different ways, so many different methods.
We can disagree on that. That's fine.
All right, Matt. Tony Kelley's taking on Adrian Yanez. I think Adrian Yanez beats Tony Kelley. I don't think that many people should overlook Tony Kelley in this fight. He's a big underdog. 5% of the fans are taking him to win. I think he's got a decent enough shot. And I think if people are going, you know what? Because Adrian Yanez, in his 4 fights in the UFC, 3 of them performance bonuses, 1 of them a fight of the night. They're like, this guy is the anchor to all of my parlays. I'm going to make bank off Adrian Yanez. I don't think this is the fight.
Song Yadong, Marlon Moraes. No. Here's the thing about Adrian Yanez. Up until this point, he has been one of the brightest prospects in this division, and his run has been sort of reminiscent of guys like Song Yadong and Cody Stamann. It does get to a certain point where it goes, okay, you go from beating guys you're supposed to beat. Now we do need to see you in there with a competitive fighter. And I know Davey Grant did make that fight very competitive. I know one of the judges actually scored that fight for Davey Grant. Ridiculous if you ask me, but still, that was a very competitive fight against a very good fighter. I did feel like after the Davey Grant fight, we were going to see Adrian Yanez, and maybe not against a ranked fighter, but one of those fighters who's near the end of their career maybe, who they were ranked for a long time. Tony Kelley, though, this is a great opportunity for his career, and like you said, I really like that he had his next opponent in mind after he beat Randy Costa. He knew that Costa and Yanez were connected, being similar opponents or previous opponents, and that Yanez does have a lot of hype behind him. So if Tony Kelley at 35 years of age can beat who many people believe is the hottest prospect in the division, it's going to put him right up, I mean, almost into the rankings if he is able to look good, but I still do have Adrian Yanez.
We're looking at it right now. I mean, maybe Timur Valiev, Casey Kenny, Frankie Edgar, Kyler Phillips, maybe their future opponents. There's a lot of different names that you could throw out there. But yeah, when you have a look at this fight, I mean, I think Adrian Yanez is going to be able to get it done. We'll see how Kelley makes out in the in-betweens, on the inside up against the cage. If he's able to take this fight down to the mat, I think it's going to be a very fun one, but both of us going with Texas's own Adrian Yanez to get his first win inside of that home state. It should be an interesting one, a big-time fight at 145 pounds in the main event. Calvin Kattar's taking on a tough out. Only 2 have been able to do it in 19 fights in Josh Emmett. We can't wait for it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Coming up this weekend, Gregory Rodrigues, the nickname is RoboCop. He's going to be taking on Julian Marquez, a man who had a shot with Miley Cyrus, and he blew it. He absolutely blew it. It is a big-time fight in the middleweight division with potential ranked opponent next, ? Implications. And for Gregory Rodrigues, he lost to Jordan Williams on Dana White's Contender Series 2020. So what does he do? He retools a little bit, makes the move over to Sanford MMA. Used to be a Kings guy when he came into the States. And then he's able to get wins in LFA and ultimately become their champion. He goes on a tidy little win streak in the UFC as well with wins over Dusko Todorovic. He gets a win over Jun Young Park. And he lost last fight to Armin Petrosian by split decision. You can make arguments for either fighter. I'm here to hear it. All that to say, he did lose his last fight. And that fight wasn't all that long ago. It was this year. It was about 3 months ago. He's going to be taking on the Cuban Missile Crisis, Julian Marquez, who had a very long layoff due to a litany of injuries after he lost by split decision to Alessio Di Chirico, gets a win over Maki Pitolo a little over a year ago, gets a win over Sam Alvey in short succession, and then after that, now it's been another long layoff for Marquez, a guy who has switched it up. He used to be, an Extreme Couture guy in Vegas. He was working at Top Golf. He was all the rage when he came in off Contender Series 2017. That was the OG season. And for Marquez, switched it up over to Gloria MMA and Fitness, added little bits of wrinkles to his game. And you look at Marquez, he's one of those guys, drops you on the feet, gets you to the mat, and then he's able to submit you, or he works in some of the takedowns into his game. But both these guys, very, very dynamic. And I look at this fight, Matt, I hate to kind of tip my hand, but Julian Marquez, very good on the feet, very good on the mat. Gregory Rodrigues, turn all the things that Marquez is good up, and then break that dial off, and that's Gregory Rodrigues, except sometimes he stands in the pocket way too long and gets hit.
I know we're trying to sell a package right now on Julian Marquez. Very good on the feet, I think, is a bit of a stretch, because I do think Gregory Rodrigues has a massive advantage in the feet in this fight.
There's one thing both these guys do that I dislike, and again,
Julian Marquez tries to break his opponent's hands with his chin.
Both of these guys will wait and figure out distance, and for Marquez, even in his last fight against Sam Alvey, pushed him up against, and he's going, it's like watching Caitlin Chukagi. He's going, ha, 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 ha. And I mean, it works for her, so that could get Julian Marquez up to a top contender spot. I don't know. But for Marquez, he does that, but then there's long periods of inactivity. For Gregory Rodrigues, same deal. He'll whip a low kick. He'll throw a bit of a jab. But there's so many periods where both these guys just wait for their opponent to do something or make a mistake. And I know both guys have bonuses to their name. I know for Gregory Rodrigues, you look at it, fight of the night that he had against Jun Young Park, withstood some adversity, got a finish. For Marquez, a lot of performance bonuses. But at the end of the day, this could end up being a boring fight until it's not, too.
I think it's good. I agree, but I disagree a little bit. I do think Gregory Rodrigues is going to be the one who pushes the fight in this matchup, because for Julian Marquez, he doesn't have the best volume on the feet. He is somebody who will fight in that little burst and then take a period of inactivity. With Rodrigues, I think when he gets in range on Marquez, we're going to see a lot more boxing combinations, because even Sam Alvey was able to have some success on the feet against Marquez, and that's the thing that does stand out against a lot of Marquez's fights in the UFC. Even in his wins, and when you just look at his record on a page, especially his last 5, you're like, wow, he's 4-1. He is 4-1, but he's eaten a lot of clean shots throughout all of his fights. And I would go back to the Deron Stewart fight. So many people were excited about his first fight in the UFC. That was a fight of the night that barely got out of the first round. That's how wild it was. But Julian Marquez was eating massive shots at range from a guy like Deron Stewart, who isn't massive for the weight division. I think that's fair to say. And I look at Gregory Rodrigues as one of the bigger punchers in this division. So I'm going to be very curious to see if Marquez can stand up to the punching power of Gregory Rodrigues. I fully expect Julian Marquez to be the more offensive wrestler in this matchup. I do think he's going to have to look for the takedown quite a bit. And I think he's going to have to do the Brian Ortega game plan, which is fake the takedown, make your opponent kind of sprawl prematurely, and then try to initiate a scramble off of that. Because I do think he's the faster grappler than Gregory Rodrigues. I do think he'll have some success in the transitions in this fight, because that's the one great thing about Julian Marquez. He's very good at finding necks in transitions. I'm not saying he's the better grappler for grappling's sake, but that is one of Marquez's X factors. He's very good at just causing a lot of chaos in the ring and then taking advantage of you slipping up because it is so chaotic. Other than a situation like that, I do think Gregory Rodrigues, he's the cleaner fighter in a lot more areas throughout this matchup, and that's why I do like him in this fight. But isn't it wild that we're sitting here so many years after the kind of Julian Marquez experiment? Gregory Rodrigues is a 2-1 favorite over Julian Marquez. Like, at the start of Marquez's career, I never would have thought that. You'd almost think, wow, he's in the top 10. He's been around for a while at this point, but it definitely hasn't been the career trajectory that a lot of people thought it would be for Marquez.
Like, I mean, for me, like, I disagree. Like, Gregory Rodrigues, 8-time national jiu-jitsu champion, jiu-jitsu world champion. Like, you look at his takedowns and...
But I just think, okay, if you're getting boxed up on the feet by Gregory Rodrigues, then what's plan B?
You shoot for a takedown and you get caught in a submission. Like, I don't know. If Julian Marquez wins this fight, I think he wins by knockout. I don't think he wins by submission. I don't think he wins by decision. If Gregory Rodrigues wins, it could be all of the above and more. Like, that's the way that I look at this. I think he has multiple ways to win this fight. And I look at the odds. They opened at par. Marquez now a plus 165. Rodrigues minus 205. We have a look at the Topology votes. Again, one guy's more popular than the other guy. We know that. So I'm going to say over under 65% Rodrigues.
Rodrigues should be heavily favored. No?
Nope. So 918 total votes. 54% Rodrigues. 54% have him to win by knockout. 31% by decision. For the 46% that are Marquez, 30% by decision. 23 silly gooses by a percentage point by submission, 40% by knockout. Like, maybe, okay.
Call them silly goose, but this is the thing.
Never
if you
thought,
get tired, you can get submitted.
Never thought Yuri Prochazka would submit Glover Teixeira. Never thought Fluffy Hernandez, Anthony Hernandez, would beat my guy, Adolfo Vieira. But again, in this fight, I've seen Gregory Rodrigues go out there, fight a hard 3 rounds against Armin Petrosyan and not be in any kind of danger like that. Now, Petrosyan, world-class kickboxer. Julian Marquez mixes it up. Not necessarily known for his kickboxing. But I have Gregory Rodrigues in this fight, and it would surprise me if Julian Marquez beat him.
I have Gregory Rodrigues in this fight, but I'm sticking to it. I think Marquez can have success grappling. Again, anybody past middleweight is not good at sweeping off their back. Nobody is. Jacare can't do it. Glover Teixeira can't do it. It is not very often that you see fighters do transitions off their back at the higher weight classes, and Julian Marquez in this matchup should be the superior wrestler. And I really do think that if he gets this fight to the mat, he can at least waste time. I'm not saying he's going to submit Gregory Rodrigues, but control time matters at the end of the day, and I do think Marquez can win rounds that way, although I still do have Gregory Rodrigues in this fight. Make as many faces as you want to, but I do like Rodrigues in the matchup, but primarily for his stand-up ability.
The Dominic Cruz scoring criteria, and Matt throwing up a red flag with Julian Marquez, but both of us ultimately picking the Brazilian here, the former LFA champ, Gregory Rodrigues, to get the win. Matt, I know you are so excited about Tim Means, Kevin Holland, aren't you?
It's going to be a great fight, because for Kevin Holland, we know how good he is at 185 in the UFC. People seem to forget he did knock out Jeff Neal at 170, though, before they both came to the UFC. So I think we all realize how good Kevin Holland can be at this weight class, but Tim Means is the ultimate litmus test. He's going to make a fight very hard for you. You could beat him by first-round knockout, but this is sort of my point I was trying to bring up originally. Winning by first-round knockout against Tim Means is harder than winning a decision against, like, Brad Tavares in some cases. You know what I mean? Like, Brad Tavares he'll wrestle with you a little bit, he'll volume strike from the outside, but you're never going to be pushed to your absolute threshold. Tim Means is going to bring the fight no matter who you are, so he'll make the best of it, but that's a tough one.
You're not going to want to miss that. Keep locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say,
let's get into it.
And a big time fight coming up this weekend at lightweight. We have the return of the Georgian Viking, Guram Kutaladze. He's going to be taking on the former M1 Global lightweight champ in Damir Ismagulov. And if you have friends that are non-MMA fans, you want to turn them on to something, you want to get them on early, it's one of these types of fights. I mean, you look at it for Guram Kutaladze, his last time out, he hit as more than a 2-1 underdog, taking on one half of next weekend's main event in Mateusz Gamrot. Now, for Guram, he's been off since that fight. That fight was in October of 2020. He had a big-time knee injury that required surgery. He had a rib injury that required a little bit of time away. And listen, it has been a long time since we've seen Guram in the octagon. And for Mateusz Gamrot, he went out and beat Scott Holtzman, beat Jeremy Stevens, and then his last time out, beat Carlos Diego Ferreira. Now he's taking on Arman Tsarukyan. The world is his oyster. For Guram, he's been in training videos with Ilya Topuria and Khamzat Chimaev, and he's kind of been a bit of a hype man for 2 years, but we haven't seen him inside the cage. And for Damir Ismagulov, his last time out, he didn't look like the absolute world beater that we've seen in the
Certainly
UFC.
did not.
Multiple 10-8s across all of his fights. He debuted against Alex Georgis, and that was the last time anybody ever saw Alex Georgis. He beat Joel Alvarez and looked amazing in that fight. He beat Thiago Moises and looked really, really good in that fight. But against Rafael Alves, he wins that fight, and you could give it to him 30-27, but he got dropped in the first 11 seconds of that one, and then he's able to rally back, utilize his wrestling, and that's a huge strong suit of Damir Ismagulov. He's a master of sport in martial arts, which is very interesting, but the best part for Damir is so well-rounded, and when he needs to wrestle, he can wrestle. When he needs to strike, he can strike. He took most of this camp at Tiger Muay Thai. A little bit of it rounds it out at American Top Team. He's been at ATT before. He's been at Tiger Muay Thai before. Kind of similar to another guy that's been at both of those gyms, Movsar Evloev, that you've seen very recently inside of the cage. But, Matt, I look at this fight as Damir, very well-rounded, but even his last fight against Alves, he tired in the third round, and it was odd. It was really, really something that surprised me. For Guram Kutateladze, though, so many question marks out there because when he gets taken down off his back, he's wild with his submissions. Will take guys down on occasion that we had seen in the regional tape study, but when he strikes, boy, is this guy a lot of fun.
Everything he lets go, it's like it's wound up with 11 rubber bands, and then he just lets it fire. Like, there's so much force behind everything that Kutateladze throws. It's kind of ridiculous. People forget, like, he dropped Gamrot multiple times in their fight. Now,
they credit him with one in the second.
Hurt him multiple times, though. I think that's fair to say. So, for Kutateladze, we know how good he is on the feet, and it will be interesting because this matchup is kind of similar to his first matchup that he had in the UFC. Ismagulov, he's almost like 2022's version of what 2019's Mateusz Gamrot was. He's a very well-rounded fighter. What I do like about Damir Ismagulov, and it's kind of like what you had said earlier, when the going gets tough, he can get tough too. And I think that's really important. That's almost like the final piece that we find out about a lot of these fighters. Because if you're really good on your way up the rankings, normally you're blowing the doors off everybody. The fights aren't that difficult. You're a big favorite in all your matchups. And then you finally have that one really tough fight against a guy whose style just doesn't mesh well with yours. Like, if you go back to Jamal Emmers versus Pat Sabatini, Emmers cracks him, hurts him. You think it's going to go bad for Sabatini, but Pat becomes the fighter that he is today. He gets through that hard spot and he ends up winning by submission. Now we all realize how good he is. I put a lot of stock into Ismagulov's ability to come back after getting hurt by Alves, to being able to out-grapple him. Yes, he did tire in the end of that fight, but that was a grueling fight between those guys. So I think in a fight against Kutateladze, who might not have the same aggression behind everything he throws, although he might have more power behind it, I don't worry as much about Ismagulov's gas tank, because with Alves, he's constantly forcing the clash all the time. He's always going to move forward. He's going to make you do something at all points. Whereas with Guram, he'll wait a little bit more. He'll try to set things up a little bit, almost in like a Uriah Hall manner. I think that's a fair comp for him, at least on the feet, because he'll kind of pause, he'll wait, then he'll throw a crazy big strike, and it'll land with very high accuracy. And that's what I like about Guram. He's almost like Joey Votto in his prime. When he swings, there's not a lot of misses, and that's what you appreciate out of him. He has very high accuracy with his strikes, although he is someone who can get carried away from time to time, throwing some, crazy spinning back kicks and whatnot.
Yeah, and you look at it for Guram, his last time out was a fight of the night against Gamrot. Everybody thinks so highly of Gamrot at this juncture. And Gamrot was able to go 5 of 16 on his takedown attempts. That was a big thing. You look at it, it's a win for Kutateladze. I thought Gamrot won the first round, won the third round, Guram won the second round. But if you look at it, the difference in the takedowns, though, from Gamrot to a guy like Ismagulov, Gamrot's going for wild stuff. He's going for ankle picks. That was one of the first takedowns he was able to get. He goes for a lot of oddball stuff. Now, for Guram, he was able to get out of those bad positions by going for a heel hook, going for, an arm bar to then get himself back up to his feet. He's really creative when he gets in those odd spots, and I think that's a lot of credit that you have to give to the team and all-stars that he trains with. And I know, again, I mentioned it, I've seen so much Guram in the last 2 years training with some fighters in the States, at the PI, at Extreme Couture, at All-Stars, over in Spain. Like, he's been all over the world training with very, very good guys. So it was only a matter of time before you get to see him back in the UFC. Same thing can be said for Ismagulov. You look at it, his second to last fight was 2 years and 8 months ago when he took on Thiago Moises. And then it took about a year and a half before he ended up fighting against Alves, which was almost a full year ago.
The wins age like wine, though, don't they?
They do, and they look really good for Damir Ismagulov. It's just, I wish he fought more often.
And can we honestly put both these guys in that category? Like, these two guys could go down as all-time great what-ifs, if we're being honest. Like, if Guram never gets hurt, beats Gamrot, we all know where Gamrot is right now in the UFC and the whole hierarchy of the lightweight division. Like, this is the best division in arguably the whole entire sport. I don't think that's a wild thing to say at all. And Dolidze in his UFC debut was able to beat a guy who right now is considered one of the best fighters in this division. And Ismagulov has beat a guy who in Moises, who at one point was in the top 15. It's just, it has been these long bouts of inactivity, so it is a shame. Like, if both these guys had sort of a more traditional career where you're fighting every 5 months, every 6 months, and, you know, maybe Dolidze does have a loss at this point, but the wins have been able to get him more ready for guys in the top 15. It's just, it is a shame that we haven't been able to see a more consistent version of both guys' careers.
So an MMA NYTT interview, or piece, I guess, rather, on Guram Dolidze said that he took his first fight in an unsanctioned bout when he was 9 years old. So the guy's a fucking wild man.
That's
For
hard
Damir
AF.
Ismagulov, again, his wins in the UFC. He fought great competition with M1 Global. That can't be said enough. We can say it again and again and again. He's won, 18 fights in a row. But the first 3 fights, he didn't lose a single round, and there were multiple 10-8 rounds spread out through all of the fights. So we look at the odds here. Damir Ismagulov open to -180 favorite, -170 right now. Guram open to +155, +138 as it stands. We have a look at the fan vote. This is really going to be a surprise to us. It is to you, because people love Guram. I'm going to say over under 55% Ismagulov.
I'll say over.
I'd say over. It is over. 934 total votes. 72% is Magulov. 88% by decision. For the 28% that have Dolidze, 79% by decision. Matt, this is a tough one. Who do you have to win?
I came into this fight thinking I was going to pick Guram because, again, if you do look at Mateusz Gamrot and whatever a camp would be getting ready for an opponent like that, you're probably having a very similar camp if you're getting ready for a guy like Damir Ismagulov. But this is my issue. I think back to guys in... People are either going to roll their eyes or they're going to like it. Some basketball references are on their way. Look at Paul George 2 seasons ago when he had shoulder surgery. Pascal Siakam last year. Klay Thompson. Like, even if you are a world-class athlete, you do need in-game time to kind of readjust and get back to what you used to be. And for Guram, if he isn't 98% of the fighter that he was in the Mateusz Gamrot fight, he might find himself on his back, not being able to scramble as effectively, eating some big damaging shots, because I could see Damir Ismagulov almost having like an Arman Sarukian, Joel Alvarez type performance where he looks so good, he just completely changes everybody's mind about, maybe an unimpressive performance here or there. I think that opportunity is going to be there. I'm very split on this pick, but I am ever so slightly going to side with the favorite. I thought the odds were going to be more pick'em, to be completely honest with you, but I do think Damir Ismagulov is the more complete fighter, and again, I like his ability to fight out of poor positions. His wrestling is such a dominant aspect of his fighting style that even if he is getting dropped by Guram, I think he can have a similar reaction to what Gamrot was, where even though I'm dropped, I'm immediately chain wrestling. I'm going to get into my own actions. I think this is going to be a phenomenal fight. I think this is going to be fight of the night, but I do have Damir at the end of the day, and this hopefully is one of those fights where the winner completely shoots up into like borderline top 15, because that's how good these guys both are.
Matt wants to see like a Yoel Romero or Justine Kish completely sharts right up in the rankings. That was aggressive, Matt. Watch out. We have Damir Ismagulov, a guy who I haven't picked against in the UFC, take on Guram Dolidze here. And Matt, for Guram, you talk about the knee injury, so on and so forth. That was a time ago. Like, that was quite a while ago that did happen. Then it was the rib injury, long layoff, so on and so forth. And you're not sure what you're going to get. Old man Cub Swanson tore his ACL, came back and knocked a guy out. So
didn't knock out a guy of Damir Ismagulov's caliber, though.
It is an odd one. I like Guram Dolidze in this fight. I think he has a decided advantage when it comes to the striking. I know with Damir Ismagulov, he went over to Tiger Muay Thai. He's working on his striking, and it's a gym that he's gone to a lot in the past as well. I think Guram has that X factor with the power, which I don't normally side with. I usually go with a guy who has good volume, a guy who has good movement on the feet. Damir's one of those guys that it's not on the balls of his feet all the time, but he does move his feet quite well, and he moves in and out of danger. He will get his hands up nicely, shell up, and so on and so forth. And his wrestling, you might just look at that Alex Georgie's fight and go, wow, this guy's a good wrestler. Look at his complete career body of work. It is a huge X factor, and when Damir gets you down,
oh my goodness,
it's hard to get up. and he throws strategic ground and pound. He's not an animal. It's not like Brock Lesnar hammer fist.
Count, though.
He really does make them count, and he picks his shot. So I'm going to take the underdog in this one, going with the Georgian Viking in Guram Kutaladze. You have Damir Ismagulov, but listen.
I thought Guram beat Gamrot, to be completely honest. Like, that's how good I think Guram is, but that's also how good I think Damir is. Again, I can't stress this enough. Just because these guys don't have numbers next to their name does not mean that they're not ranked caliber fighters. That really is the whole case in this fight.
High-level fight, and a lot of them to come on this main card. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night picks, and as we always say, let's get into it. Coming up this weekend, some might say that middleweight is the worst division in all of MMA, but listen, hey, anticipate a finish in this fight coming up this weekend. We have new Mansa Joaquin Buckley taking on Albert Duraev, the former welterweight champ until he couldn't defend the title anymore because he was stripped, because he missed weight, and then he became a middleweight champ over the ACB. And for Duraev, he's such an interesting case because he had a 3-year layoff, and then his manager must have went, you know what? The only way we can get you a UFC contract is to fight on Dana White's Contender Series, but you're going to win that fight, and then you're going to sign a contract for little to no money and little to no popularity, and that's where Albert Duraev finds himself right now, because in his last fight, he fought against Roman Kopylov, a guy who we were sold a bill of goods on, but we weren't delivered. And in that fight, did Duraev look good? Yeah, he looked pretty good. Did he get dropped? Yeah, he might have got dropped. Did his eyes swell up like a grapefruit? You bet it did. So Duraev's coming into this fight with a decided advantage in one major aspect against Joaquin Buckley. And that's the fact that when Duraev takes guys down, they have a very hard time getting back up to their feet. Would you agree, Matt?
It's like you know those weighted blankets? Some of them are very pleasant.
I don't.
Okay, wow, Craig doesn't like a weighted blanket.
Nope.
Some of them are nice. Some of them weigh like 50 pounds, though, and he can't get them off of you. Albert Duraev is like that weighted blanket. That is his fighting style. And really, this fight comes down to, can Duraev protect his head until he gets the fight to the mat? Because Joaquin Buckley kind of reminds me of Jordan Poole. Like, the meme right now is, Jordan Poole hoops like there's only bad bitches in attendance. Joaquin Buckley fights like there's nothing but bad bitches watching. And I kind of respect that, if we're all being honest, because he goes, like we all know, he's got one of the greatest knockouts of all time against Zipa Kasanganay, but he does go for it in those first 5 minutes and throws crazy leather. And he, listen, lived by the sword, died by the sword. If you're able to land those big shots, he'll have a win like we saw against Jordan Wright. Another absolutely brutal knockout that was insane to watch. But we also know what happens when Joaquin Buckley isn't able to, land with that big blitz. He doesn't just tire as fights go on. He will change his fighting style. I think that's really important because even in the Kevin Holland fight, and I do think that's an important one to bring up, I know that was his UFC debut against a guy who is fighting further up on the card, although be it down a division. He goes from throwing massive bursts to being more of a single shot striker. And I do worry about that when you're fighting a guy like Duraev, who on one hand, it honestly might help him. The more I'm talking myself out of this, because if Buckley doesn't let his hands go as much, maybe that will allow him to focus a little bit more on his takedown defense, keep his hands a little bit lower, because that's going to be the key for this fight. Again, Joaquin Buckley cannot win this fight if he gets taken down at any point. Like, his defensive grappling, his first step, like, none of his direct counters are very good against someone who has the grappling style of Albert Duraev. So more than anything, I'm very curious, how is Joaquin Buckley going to use his footwork to just stay away from Duraev?
Well, I mean, for Buckley, he's gone to every camp under the sun. Murcielago MMA, Elevate MMA. I've made that the placeholder in the graphics for this one. Preston Parsons gym that's in Florida. But you look at it from Buckley, even just focus on his last fight. He's taken on Abdulrazak Alhassan. How does the fight start? Buckley initiates some of the grappling. Buckley has success with the grappling. Second round, it's close. I mean, Buckley grappling, you have no success from Alhassan. Third round, Alhassan takes him down 3 times and has a ton of success. Like, I don't know about this whole thing about Joaquin Buckley. I get it. First burst, first round, tons of success. In the UFC, again, we can pick out some of the wins. You talked about it. Kasanganay, Jordan Wright, Antonio Arroyo, Abdulrazak Alhassan by split decision. Like, it's not the greatest level of competition that's in the UFC. Some of the guys not necessarily still with the promotion. His Instagram bio says most viral fighter of all time. He's got 149,000 Instagram followers. Like, he was on a Kanye track, but, like, Calvin Kattar has more followers on Instagram.
But that does mean going viral. Like, his one video, I think, does have the most shares and views of any UFC video ever.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like being,
No, not at all.
It's kind of like being the John Oates of the group. Like, yeah, he
In
went
what
viral.
way, Craig?
He went viral because Daryl was the viral vessel that got him onto the airwaves.
I don't think that's the best comp of all time. Albert Duraev's style is made to beat guys like Joaquin Buckley, though. And Yes, I'm worried about Duraev getting clipped with a big shot early because he is an upright striker and he hasn't really mastered that like Marvin Vittoriness to his game where it's, hey, how do I get on the inside to actually take the fight where I need to take it for me to have the majority of my success? But every minute that ticks off the clock favors Duraev even more and even more and even more. And Buckley has fought in a slightly more reserved tone his last couple of fights, but I still don't think it's going to be enough to beat someone like Duraev, who will force the fight to you, especially with his own wrestling exchanges. And I do think that's the key. If he can... Not getting the takedown, like the first takedown, might honestly be beneficial for Duraev. The more he can chain wrestle and just make Joaquin Buckley work early on in this fight is going to help him even more as the fight goes on. It's almost going to work for Duraev like a leg kick or a body kick would work for a more natural striker. I do think him just trying to impose his physicality on Joaquin Buckley is going to be very important. And again, I bring it back to what I said at the start of the video, which is this fight is just, it only comes down to, can Duraev protect his head until he gets that takedown? Because yes, he's upright. He doesn't take a shot all that well. His one X factor cancels out everything Joaquin Buckley's good at.
Yeah, this is a really odd one. Again, for Duraev, his last time out against Kopylov, he went 111-16 in the total strikes, but he also got dinged to the old eyeball, and it definitely didn't look very good. So for Duraev, that last fight against Kopylov was about 6 months ago, almost 7 months ago for Mr. Joaquin Buckley's last time out 4 months ago against Abdurazak Alhassan. We look at the odds for this fight. Duraev opened the favorite -160, now -213. We have a look at Joaquin Buckley, open to +140, +171 as it stands. Over-under on Tapology, surprise us, it is to you. I'm going to say over-under 72.5% Duraev.
I'll say over.
I'm going to say it's over. It is under, so it is 837 total votes, 66% Duraev, 38% by decision, 46% by submission for the 34% that have Buckley, 71% by knockout. It would surprise the bejesus out of me if Joaquin Buckley beat Albert Duraev by decision or submission. I will say that much. This is a really tough one, though. I mean, for Albert Duraev, that one X factor is so good and so strong. Closing the distance, though, you always do worry about a guy like Joaquin Buckley.
Abdurazak Alhassan's not that good at grappling, and he can't take a shot at 185.
Judo Thunder.
That's fine. He's not all that great at his... Jacob Malkoun took him down 400 times in a 50.
He wasn't ready for it.
I don't care. Abdurazak Alhassan's not a great defensive grappler or a great offensive grappler. Joaquin Buckley could barely grapple with him. I think Albert Duraev, he's the bigger fighter, and I do think that's really going to matter. Joaquin Buckley has a really big upper body, but he's kind of small for this division, and I do think that if Duraev's able to get on top of him, he's going to sap a lot of his strength, so I like Duraev in this fight.
Both of us going with the former welterweight champion Albert Duraev to get the win. That grinding, grimy style definitely doesn't bode well for the guys in this middleweight division, and it is an interesting fight. We move forward. Tim Means taking on Kevin Holland, Donald Cerrone, Joe Lozon, and Lozon's prodigy? Question mark? Calvin Kattar taking on Josh Emmett in that main event. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say,
let's get into it.
Time fight coming up this weekend. Our former Fight Night Picks 2020 Male Fighter of the Year, Kevin Holland, is going to be taking on the Dirty Bird, Tim Means, a guy who debuted in the UFC about 10 years ago. It's been a long, slow burn for the man that is no stranger to a performance bonus, and realistically, I could say that about both these guys. I mean, Kevin Holland came in, made an impact, then rose like a phoenix, and then sank like a stone. And it did not go well for Kevin Holland in 2021. And that has been noted and talked about for, well, I guess a year at this point. Now, he did look impressive in the way that he was able to get the finish his last time out against Alex Oliveira. Ultimately withstood a little bit of adversity in that fight. Maybe a surprise to some people that he weighed exactly 170 pounds in that return down to welterweight. But for Kevin Holland, he was such an interesting prospect at 185, especially off that Jacare Souza knockout, because a lot of people thought, hey, like this is the guy. He's the guy. And now it's at 170 pounds, taking on a guy like Tim Means, who has fought a decent level of competition throughout his UFC tenure, does have some really tidy wins. And his last time out, he was able to get a very nice win over Nicholas Dalby, a guy who is well-rounded in his own right. So, Matt, I really do like this fight. I know you have a lot of vested interest in this one. What do you make of this one between these two guys who are at totally different points in their career?
What do you want to know about Tim Means, Craig? What do you want to know?
What did he eat for breakfast yesterday?
Unfortunately, I can't give you that information, but when it comes to MMA stuff and Tim Means, I'd like to think I'm one of the leading experts at this point. because there's not a lot of other ones out there. Tim Means is one of my favorite unranked fighters, though, of all time, because, like you said, he's fought nothing but killers, but has never really got the notoriety that he deserves from it. He's almost like if you elongate the career of, like, Mike Perry's not a great example, but you get the idea. Tim Means is that type of an action fighter who fight in, fight out, win, lose, or draw, is going to make it a very, very competitive performance. And I know he broke his ankle against Nico Price. That was a horrible knockout loss that a lot of people remember, but he has looked pretty good after that fight. I know he has the loss to Daniel Rodrigues, a guy who's on the borderline of the top 15 right now, but if you look at his string of wins recently, he beat the brakes off Laureano Staropoli, especially on the feet. He looked really good with his boxing combinations. He was able to roll downhill in that fight. He beat Mike Perry so poorly in that fight. Like, a lot of people thought, oh, well, if Mike Perry's going to get a win, if he's going to get back on track, like, Tim Means is the ideal opponent. He's hittable. He's kind of stationary. Tim Means boxed his ears in, and it wasn't a close fight whatsoever. And then against Nicholas Dalby, it was more of the same in that fight as well. So for Tim Means, this is probably the better stage of his career to fight Kevin Holland. Like, there's never been as good of a time to really get your name into the rankings discussion as there is right now. Because for Kevin Holland, I think he is going to get a ranked opponent next if he is able to beat Tim Means. I do think the UFC looks at him as, hey, we'll give him a couple warm-up fights at 170. We'll see how he looks with this weight cut. But we kind of know where he does belong, because he did look really good at 185. I know he lost to Marvin Vettori. I know he lost to Derek Brunson. But even in those fights, he did have moments. And you can't always just look at the result. And it doesn't always tell you the whole story. Like, he had rocked Marvin Vettori near the end of their fight. He had him straightened up with a few really nice hooks. He had Derek Brunson hurt near the end of their fight. Like, Kevin Holland at 185, which was not his natural weight class, was still having decent levels of success against some of the best fighters in the weight division. He had that weird fight against Kyle Daukaus, and that was a weird fight to go down to 170 off of. And that's why I was surprised to see
that one was
him.
at 185.
Exactly, but that's what I mean. Going off of that performance, he decided to move down to 170. And that was a performance that didn't really give him an answer as to whether or not he belonged in the middleweight division or not. So that's why I was surprised to see him go down after that fight.
And it was very odd, too, because they had rebooked that fight. So in all actuality, he was going to kick it at 185. There's always been rumblings that Holland might make the move back down. He gets a performance bonus his last time out. Bonus against Jacare. Bonus against Charlie Ontiveros. Bonus against Joaquin Buckley. Like, he has really earned his keep. And if you look at it for Tim Means, he has bonuses over John Howard, Doomsday. He's got a bonus over Diego Lima. But realistically, lately, it has been a nice 3-fight win streak for Tim Means that goes all the way back almost 2 years ago when he fought Laureano Staropoli. So, Matt, this is such an interesting matchup because for Tim Means, again, it's so many weapons for a long-rangey guy, and we can say that about both these guys. Obviously, Holland, a little bit taller, a little bit longer, but for Tim Means, great when he boxes, but really good in close and in the clinch.
And that's why I think this fight's very important for the career of Kevin Holland, because we know how good of a striker he is at range because he is so long, he is so rangy for the division. On the inside, though, he doesn't really have that one weapon that can get guys off of him, and we know that's how good Tim Means is, to where, okay, I can crash distance with my boxing, I can throw that body kick, but when I do get in close, he loves throwing elbows. I think that's going to be the big key of this fight. Again, if you've ever watched Tim Means fight, you know that is going to be the key to his fights. I think the body shots are going to be important too, because Tim Means is one of these fighters who throws in a lot of combination. He doesn't really have that one-punch power to where he's going to hit Kevin Holland one time, he's going to face-plant him. But he can go to the body, he can go to the head, and he does mix it up very well. So I'm curious to see what kind of answers Kevin Holland has when Tim Means gets on the inside, because even against Cowboy Oliveira in his last fight at 170, like, Oliveira did have some success on the feet before he got hurt in that fight. And I know we can say that a lot about Alex Oliveira. He looked good until he didn't. But if you think that, okay, Tim Means is much more durable than Alex Oliveira, I think that's fair to say. Maybe not much more durable.
Not as good at spreading his seed across the land.
Certainly is not, because Alex Oliveira would be like the Michael Jordan of the Maury Povich show if it was still on TV. But for Tim Means, he will be able to have success in a lot of the same ranges that Alex Oliveira was. So I could see a world, and I'm not predicting Tim Means is going to win. A lot of people are probably thinking, hey, Matt's really biased towards the Dirty Bird, he's going to pick him. No, I'm not. But I do think that there are some areas in this fight where Means can have a lot of success at. And I think this is a great building fight for Kevin Holland. I do expect him to win, don't get me wrong, but I do think he's going to have to show us another wrinkle to his game if he is going to get the win. He's going to have to deal with the forward pressure of Tim Means. He's going to have to deal with the volume striking. I expect Holland to probably finish this fight later with his distance striking, but I think this is a great matchup for Holland, who still has some unanswered questions at the welterweight division.
Holland opened up a minus 310 favorite. The line shifted off the hop. He's now minus 253 or thereabouts on best fight odds. For Tim Means, open to plus 260. plus 200 as it stands. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprise to us there to you. I'm going to say over under 80% Holland.
I expect it to be like 90-something. Yeah.
It is exactly 90%. 984 total votes. 19% by decision for Holland. 70% by knockout or thereabouts. For the 10% that I mean 72% by decision. Yeah, I think Kevin Holland wins this fight. I mean, again, there's going to be a lot of naysayers. Let the naysayers neigh out there this week because this is pot and popcorn card for your boy. I mean, there's a lot of juiced up bigger favorites. Even though we talked about how good the matchmaking is, there are a lot of bigger favorites. I think Kevin Holland, every time he goes out there at 170, you sit there and you kind of wonder about the weight cut because he is so long and so rangy. It can't be an easy cut. But again, a guy like Tim Means, he is on a nice win streak. He can mix it up quite well. Positions where Kevin Holland could struggle, you touched on it, the clinch, the elbows. Maybe if he's taken down, maybe, but I don't see it.
I think Kevin Holland has a massive grappling advantage over Tim Means in this fight. That's what I do expect.
You never say that. You never get to say that anyway.
But Kevin Holland offensively as a grappler is pretty good. He does have wins by rear naked choke. He is able to grapple some of his opponents. It's just the wrestling component. I think Kevin Holland does have good jiu-jitsu. It's just against dominant wrestlers, they can hold him down, and he's not really able to get any separation to then explode out of positions. Again, body shots are going to be the key to this fight, because if you think Kevin Holland does have a hard weight cut to get down to 170, and he probably does, being 6'3", he will be susceptible to body shots. And again, Tim Means has a great body kick. He really does. It's something he likes to use to enter distance or to enter range. So I could see a world where he hits Kevin Holland with a body kick, might hurt him a little bit from that. Flurries on him up against the cage, and maybe Tim Means is able to get a really nice win near the end of his career. But I do think Kevin Holland is more the total package at this weight class, and this is what I expect too. I think maybe the first time down at 170, that might have been the worst performance, and maybe it will start to look better as he gets more fights in this weight class. I think he'll look a little bit better against Tim Means, and then maybe he will be ready for a ranked fighter, or maybe someone on the cusp of the rankings like a Michelle Pereira type.
Big time fight coming up at 170 pounds. Both of us going with the Trailblazer, Kevin Holland, to get the win. Co-main event, something. Donald Cerrone's taking on Joe Lauzon in the main event, though. Calvin Kattar, Josh Emmett, you're not going to want to miss this. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say,
let's get into it.
If you're a hardcore MMA fan, picture this. We're 5 years from now and you're telling your grandkids, hey, remember the time Donald Cerrone fought Joe Lauzon in Austin, Texas? Because that's exactly what's going to happen coming up
5 years, tell your grandkids.
Yeah, you're like Alex Oliveira.
Oh my goodness. There's I don't even want to get into it.
It's just wildness all over. But Matt, I do look at this fight. We have Donald Cerrone, Joe Lauzon, and it's one of those ones where, well, if you're a man in your 60s and you have grandkids, you know what I mean.
How many people do you think watch our videos in their 60s? I think a lot of people are around our age, and I don't think a lot of them are going to have grandkids in 5 years.
A lot of them are in that 30 to 40 demo, so that is where it's at. But regardless of that, we do look at this fight. We have Cerrone taking on Lauzon, and this is a fight that was supposed to take place a couple of months ago, and then it was bounced, and now we're here. So we're going to throw it on back to that original video. It's not like anything wild and crazy happened. There was an illness, and that was about it. And then we will update you with the odds and make a final pick and prediction on this fight. Coming up this weekend with 33 performance bonuses among them and a combined age of 77, we have Donald Cowboy Cerrone taking on the coach that is Joe Lauzon. You could say that about either one of these guys. For Donald Cerrone, he has the BMF Ranch. I've seen a lot of fighters go there recently. Daniel Rodrigues, a longtime guy there. Cameron Else, that's been in the UFC.
Yeah, Rodrigues has made some stops throughout the years.
You've also had Sasha Platnikov and Cerrone for this camp. A little bit there, a little bit with those guys at Syndicate MMA. Taking on Joe Lauzon out of, well, Lauzon's mixed martial arts. And a lot of fighters that have gone through that door as well lately. But a really weird point in these guys' career, because I talk about it in terms of the bonuses, and they have won so many of them. For Cerrone, his last bonus against Tony Ferguson, a fight of the night where he blew his nose and his eyeball puffed up and he looked like an old miner from the 1800s. Before that, bonuses over or against Ali Quinta, fight of the night performance bonus against Alex Hernandez, and a performance bonus over Mike Perry. And if you look at it for Joe Lauzon, his last performance bonuses, or bonus in general, was a fight of the night against Jim Miller in 2016. Obviously, we know where these guys are right now, because Cerrone, a little bit older. Joe Lauzon hasn't been fighting as much.
A little bit older.
Hasn't been fighting as much, has Joe Lauzon. However, Joe Lozon had a fight against Jonathan Pierce that just ages so well. And for Jonathan Pierce, he's bucked it. Like, he's past it now, but that was Lozon's last fight. So he can still rest on those laurels. It's just odd to see this fight right now in 2022 where Cowboy Cerrone, I can, use a cheesy term and say, okay, well, this guy's a gunslinger. And you would agree with me,
He's about this life, though, 100%. Like, when you think about an MMA fighter in his day-to-day life and in the cage, you probably have an idea of someone like Cowboy Cerrone. He's riding horses. He's on, doing jet skis and stuff. Like, Cowboy does wild stuff in his spare time. Goes skydiving. He hunts a lot. Like, Cowboy is what his nickname is. And it's been really nice to see it. I do agree with you. It's weird to see these guys fight each other in 2022, but I wouldn't want to see them with anyone else as an opponent at this stage of their careers.
Yeah, like Cowboy Cerrone goes in, fills out a personality test, and they ask you, what do you do in your spare time? And Matt Allen would say, for his response, probably, doing jet skis.
But he's always up to something. And he's
that little rascal.
But that's both of these guys are in a really good spot in the sport, and I hope they realize it themselves, because I don't look at Joe Lozon and Cowboy Cerrone as two people who, they gotta fight deep into their 40s because there's nothing else for them to do. Like, Joe Lozon, like you said, it's not like Lozon MMA is this new thing that just started a year ago and we're not sure if it's gonna make it or not. Like, Joe Lozon's an exceptional coach who has a lot of respect in the sport, who's maybe not globally known, but if you know anything about MMA, you probably know quite a bit about Joe Lozon. And same thing with Cowboy Cerrone. So I hope that these guys don't have to take a lot of fights after this one, because I really do feel like the matchmaking for this is going to result in a fun fight, because this was a point I had a lot about Joe Lozon, especially after the Grutzmacher fight, because that was an awful loss.
Oh yeah, knockout loss right there.
But it wasn't just a knockout loss. There's different ways to get knocked out. Like, Conor McGregor's knockout win over Jose Aldo isn't as bad as how bad Lozon looked against Grutzmacher. There was no response. And that's what I talked about. Darren Elkins, that was a big point for me last weekend. He looked really good and got the win. But fighters reach a stage in their career where they get hit and they just don't throw back. BJ Penn was at that point in his career. Near the end, it was, okay, I'm not getting knocked out. I'm not getting flatlined. But you could tell that once he got hurt, he could just never really recover from that point. But what I do like out of Lozon is he's taken a lot of time off since that fight, and he hasn't been as active. And I'm really glad you brought that up at the beginning, because for Cowboy, in the Morono fight, he kind of looked like the fighter that I claimed Joe Lozon was in the Grutzmacher fight. Cowboy didn't get flatlined or anything in that fight against Morono. He got hit by a clean kick, and then you could tell the second he was wobbled, he kind of shelled up. It's just, he fought in a much more defensive way. And when you're fighting a guy like Joe Lozon, who has, I'll be honest, an odd amount of explosion in his punches. He does have decent punching power. He throws weird shovel hooks.
Yeah, he comes forward into it. It's different.
Go back and watch his knockout win over Jens Pulver. This is the weirdest thing about Joe Lozon. He knocked out Jens Pulver and then said, okay, I'll take a step back and go on the Ultimate Fighter, and I'll let Jens Pulver be my coach, even though I just got a win over him. Joe Lozon is a mixed martial artist through and through. He just wants to learn more about the sport as he goes on. If he gets some wins along the way, that's pretty cool. If he loses some along the way, that's pretty cool too. Just what I want people who are watching this fight and this video to know is that we might not be watching prime Donald Cerrone or prime Joe Lozon, but I'll be damned if I let either one of these guys be disrespected this week and let people talk bad about them for how they've looked as of late. Because if you know anything about this sport, and if you are a hardcore MMA fan, you've got nothing but love for Cowboy Cerrone and for Joe Lozon.
So for Donald Cowboy Cerrone, a man who was 0-4 with a draw out there, he's going to be taking on Joe Lozon again. It was a draw, and then it was a no contest. It was fun, and then it wasn't. And for Joe Lozon, 2-3 his last time out, he absolutely beat the brakes off Jonathan Pierce, a win that ages like a fine wine. We have a look at the odds. They open -170 for Cerrone. They're still about there, +145 for Joe Lozon. We have a look at the Topology votes, Matt. Surprise to us, they are to you. I'm going to say over under 70% Cerrone.
I'll say over.
I'm going to say over. It's under, so 963 total votes, 59% Cerrone, 62% by decision, 29% by knockout. For the 41% that have Lozon, 31% by knockout, 15% by submission, and some change, around 46% by the TKO KO. So Matt, it's one of those fights where, cards on the table, somebody saw the original video, we were split on the pick. Are we still split on the pick on this one?
So what I do really like about this fight is that Joe Lauzon's making Cowboy come down to 155. I know that was a big talking point that I had in our previous video, but I do think it's really important because at 170, I think Cowboy would have a massive advantage in this fight.
All day.
He is a much bigger fighter, and we've seen him at 170 look really good. Like, this is something that does kind of get lost in all the static around Cowboy's career. He had an extremely competitive fight with Leon Edwards at 170, and it wasn't that long ago. It was like the early parts of his losing streak, but still, like, Leon Edwards is one of the best fighters in the world, and I know that was a main event in Singapore. It was a weird fight, but still, Cowboy looked like Cowboy at 170 much more recently than he has at 155. So I will be very curious to see how he looks going back down to 155. I just like Joe Lauzon in this fight. This fight does remind me a lot of when he fought Diego Sanchez at UFC 200. A lot of people are going to remember. Sanchez going into that fight had never been stopped in his UFC career. Like, Diego Sanchez, even up until UFC 200, he had already reached that legend status. We're coming up on 300 soon, and Diego Sanchez just got released by the company. So, Diego Sanchez, up until that point, had never got stopped in the UFC. Joe Lauzon hit him with one clean shot. He kind of folded up against the cage, and Lauzon unloaded on him. Cowboy does have that same kind of error in his game at this stage of his career to where he'll get hit by one big shot. It doesn't really knock him out, but he's dazed bad enough to just get into a defensive shell. I do think Joe Lauzon can take advantage of that. I hope this is the last fight for both guys, if I'm being completely honest. I think it's a great send-off win for whoever is able to get the dub, but I do have Joe Lauzon in this
Switching
fight.
the pick?
I am. I think Lauzon, just at 155, it's more suited to his weight class. And the thing is, when we go back, like, we have Cowboy's Tapology in front of us.
So that Leon Edwards fight was, listen, he had lost 3 straight, Masvidal, Lawler, Till, beat Yancy Medeiros, then he lost in the close fight to Leon Edwards. Then he won 3 fights in a row and he was on top of the world.
Against
and
Mike Perry.
They decided Tony Ferguson, Gaethje, McGregor, Pettis. Let's just kind of send him out with a bang.
So the last elite fighter that he had a competitive fight with, I would say, is Leon Edwards. But that fight was back in 2018. And you have to remember, Cowboy Cerrone started struggling at making this weight division all the way back in 2015. He decided to make the jump up to welterweight in 2016 because he was having a hard time making weight. Normally, after 7 years go by, that weight doesn't normally get easier to cut, and I don't like the way that he reacted against the shots against Alex Morono in that fight. He got hit by one clean shot, and it was immediately shell up, go to the cage, and we saw what happened shortly after. I know Joe Lauzon's not the puncher at this stage of his career that even Alex Morono is, but I just don't like the way the Cowboy accepts damage at this stage of his career.
No, and I mean, for me to take Joe Lauzon in the original video is the fact that this guy is an absolute grinder, and he will not get out of your way, and he's one of those guys that he's going to work the takedown. He has excellent jiu-jitsu. And again, you touched on it, the fact in that Diego Sanchez fight, just like Shannon Sharp, he was putting them tangs on him. And he really made him struggle.
Shannon Sharp, a man who will pay for his wife's divorce.
For me, going with Mr. Joe Lauzon in this fight. Now, Matt all of a sudden agreeing, low these months later, that original fight was scheduled. Let's make sure we get that one right for UFC 274. Oliveira versus Gaethje back in June. So it wasn't that, or sorry, back in May, early May. So it's been just over a month. Can't wait for this fight. Let us know down below in the comment section who you have. Will it be Cerrone? Will it be Lauzon? And you're not going to want to miss Kattar versus Josh Emmett. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Coming up this weekend, an absolutely wild main event at featherweight. We have the Bird Whisperer Calvin Kattar taking on Josh Emmett, a man with power in his hands. It doesn't matter if it's the first minute or the 15th minute. It won't matter if it's the first minute or the 25th minute in this 5-round main event. Josh Emmett, one of those guys that you can never count out. You look at the win streak that he's on right now. Wins over Michael Johnson, Mirsad Bektic. You've got Sugar Shane Burgos, which Sugar really isn't his nickname. It's Hurricane. And Dan Ige last time out. And I got to say, that Dan Ige fight was very close. I mean, first round,
Josh Emmett won.
First round decisive. Second rounds were close. MMA decisions. It was 7-6 in terms of Emmett, but again, a very, very close fight and very deserving of this matchup against Calvin Kattar, a guy who had Dan Ige's number when they met in a big-time main event. And I absolutely love this one, and I can't wait to get to the YouTube community tab, Matt, to talk about the comments from the fans of Fight Night Picks, because there's a lot of strong opinions over there, and you folks get a voice, so make sure you check that out if you have not already. But Matt, when it comes down to this one, I mean, you look at it for Calvin Kattar and the recent run that he's been able to go on, that big-time Giga Chikadze win, it's a fight of the night. But man, Calvin Kattar looked amazing in that fight because it was such a nice comeback from the fight of the night where he was on the wrong side of a poster against Max Holloway's time before that.
That's the thing about Calvin Kattar. Calvin Kattar occupies a very interesting space in this division because he has fought the top levels throughout this division. He has his losses are only 2. Renato Moicano, who at the time was a ranked fighter and thought of very highly in the division. Zabit, who it was a weird 3-round main event in Russia, should have been 5 rounds, and if it was, Calvin Kattar's probably going to win that fight. And Max Holloway, arguably one of the greatest fighters of all time, regardless of weight division. And the problem is, though, that Max Holloway fight was a real readjustment for Calvin Kattar. Like, when you eat 445 significant strikes, that's what the UFC Stats website has, that is a life-changing amount of damage. Now, it is kind of wild that in his next performance, he had one that was very similar as to what Holloway was able to do to him. He taught Giga Chikadze a lesson on how to box in MMA, and how throwing kicks at distance is great, but if you don't have great gas tank, if you don't have great boxing defense, those things do start to fall off a hill after the first and second round, and Calvin Kattar was really able to weaponize his pace to a beautiful effect in that fight. But against Josh Emmett, are you really going to want to take those chances in the pocket like you were able to against Giga Chikadze? Because fighting Josh Emmett is basically the exact opposite of fighting Giga. At Giga, you can't stand at range. He's going to kick your legs. He's going to kick your body. You want to get on the inside, really make him pay for his inability to use his hands offensively. Well, Josh Emmett could not be any more different. Emmett on the outside, he'll throw an inside leg kick a la Dan Henderson from time to time, but Emmett's not the type of guy who's going to be throwing head kicks at range. No, he's going to duck in, use his side-to-side movement, get on the inside, and make you pay with big hooks. And I'll be very interested to see how Calvin Kattar, fights this fight, because if he uses his jab a lot, I think he can have a ton of success. Almost fight like Devin Haney fought George Kambosos Jr. in their last fight. Avoid the big exchanges with big power punches and really make him pay with your volume on the outside, because I gotta be honest, when I looked at this fight, Josh Emmett's had a lot of fights that are very similar to this one. It's, hey, you're fighting a guy who technically is probably a bit better of a boxer than you are. He's going to throw a few more punches than you do, but at some point he's going to leave his hands down. And that's the thing, when you're fighting Josh Emmett, I said at the start of this video and I'm sticking by it, I think Josh Emmett pound for pound has the most power in the UFC. He dropped Shane Burgos so hard he made him fly across the UFC cage. Now, that fight was incredible.
So did Calvin Kattar.
But the thing is, Josh Emmett dropped him on a torn ACL. He tore his ACL in the first round of that fight and got better as the fight continued.
Yeah, I'm going to throw that graphic up there. We threw it out there before Josh Emmett fought Dan Ige. It was all of the knee injuries that he had going into the Ige fight. And I thought, that's not all that good. Now, that was back in December when he had the fight against Ige. He looked pretty good in that fight. He didn't really look like he missed a step. Now, the one thing with Josh Emmett, and again, if you're a big stat nerd, if you like to have the fun, you look at it. You look at these two guys and how they're lined up. The one troubling thing is the strikes absorbed per minute number for Calvin Kattar. Also consider that Max Holloway landed 445 significant strikes in that fight.
Wilt Chamberlain numbers.
Take that number out of it, and it's completely different. But again, Calvin Kattar fights at a higher pace, and he can keep that pace through 5 rounds. Josh Emmett, we haven't necessarily seen it, but the purpose of my talk here is the fact that I go back to the fight that he had against Michael Johnson, where he's losing that fight. He's getting outdone, similar to what Calvin Kattar could do to him. He's losing at distance. It just takes 1 second to where he wins that one in that third round, later in the third round, and he's able to finish Michael Johnson. Is it the most entertaining first 2 rounds and a half? Not necessarily. But Josh Emmett has that ability. And this is a guy that injuries from Burgos to Ige fight, injuries that he sustained in the fight against Jeremy Stephens, like broken orbital bone, concussion issues since then, and he's looked amazing in these last 4 fights. And even before that, I mean, his only other loss to Desmond Green in the UFC.
He has a knockdown in every single fight he's had since late 2017. Those aren't stats that we normally talk about. Like, that's how heavy-handed Josh Emmett is, and he makes you pay for standing in the pocket, which just so happens to be where Calvin Kattar has the majority of his own success. So I think this fight stylistically is as good as any, and it is very interesting when you look back at the career of Josh Emmett, because really hasn't fought a lot of primary wrestlers, and me as an MMA fan really does appreciate that, because it does kind of lend into what his style is. Now, when you wrestle Josh Emmett, not the greatest idea. He does have an extensive background as a collegiate wrestler, but people have been able to have some success in the past at trying to take down Josh Emmett. It at least puts out some of the fire that he does bring into the cage. So I'll be interested to see if Emmett goes for his own takedown, because he is going to have to find ways to get on the inside of the range of Calvin Kattar. But again, no matter how you cut this, I think this fight's going to be extremely competitive from, like you said, the first minute of it till the last minute of it, if it does go 25, because Calvin Kattar does not get tired when he's the one being the offensive fighter. But is it easy to throw your own 150 punches in a fight if Josh Emmett's meeting you with power shots every single time you enter the pocket? And that's the thing I keep on going back to when you talk about Josh Emmett. Every person who he has fought for the last 5 years have been dropped by. Like, that is a ridiculous stat. It really is. And Calvin Kattar has a phenomenal chin, but we know he has a phenomenal chin because he's gotten hit quite a few times in his career. And this is one of those fights where it seems like a cheap cop-out because he did it to Michael Johnson, but everything could be going wrong for Josh Emmett just for him to land that one magic shot in the 4th round, 5th round that completely turns the tide of this fight, because he knocked out Mirsad Bektic with the jab. That's how heavy-handed this man is, and he's got his own great boxing technique. So no matter what a person's prediction is, they could convince me.
He knocked down Felipe Arantes 4 times and beat him by decision. What the hell's Felipe Arantes made out of?
Just vibranium?
Vibranium.
That's the stuff that's in Wolverine.
The man's made of vibranium. Matt, so we have a look over in the YouTube community tab. We mentioned this earlier. We want to get to your comments. And listen, 741 total votes, 80% of the fans going with Calvin Kattar. Chad, the UFC dad, saying, such a tough pick again this week. It's hard to go against Calvin after his last performance, but I just see Emmett taking a W back to Cali. Hanky 2 Raw saying, it's tough to know how much to take from the Giga fight since Giga gassed in the 2nd round, but I'm still leaning towards Kattar. Don't panic, says a year ago I probably would have went with Emmett, but the way that Kattar has been looking, I'm leaning towards him. Tough call either way, going to be one hell of a fight. If you do look at it for Calvin Kattar, 4 months ago when he fought Giga Chikadze back in January for Mr. Josh Emmett, it was late 2021. Couple of more comments. Adam saying, I think Emmett lands some big shots early and has some moments, but Kattar ends up out-voluming him over the length of this fight. And one more, Matt. We'll go to Paul Pierce, throwing it up there. Emmett overextends an overhand, and Kattar catches him with an elbow.
I'm glad that you read that one, because if you remember the Jeremy Stephens fight, that's basically exactly how it ended. Stephens overextends himself, gets hit by that elbow on the inside. You know what else happened on that exchange, though? Jeremy Stephens' punch did land, and it shattered the nose of Calvin Kattar, like, very, very bad. And if Josh Emmett's able to land the exact same shot, the difference is, I know Emmett got knocked out by Jeremy Stephens, but MMA math doesn't work that way. Emmett is more heavy-handed, I would say, than Jeremy Stephens at this stage of his career, and I think he can make Calvin Kattar pay a lot more for his misses in this fight than even some of Calvin Kattar's recent past opponents can, because Holloway's a better striker than Josh Emmett, but like, nobody, even Max Holloway's biggest supporter, is going to tell you he has the power that Josh Emmett has on the feet.
No, Josh Emmett has career-ending types of power, and again, you talked about it. This is a guy that went to college for wrestling, got in MMA, told himself, if I lose a fight, well, then I'm just going to retire.
And
Just didn't. Kept winning over in California, ends up in the UFC. Yes, you lose the Desmond Green. He got out-volumed in that one. He got taken down, which you had mentioned. Could that be one of those X factors? Josh Emmett is a good offensive wrestler, but he doesn't normally have to rely on. He's one of those guys, he has odd movement when he's on the feet. Like
he does that like shuffle side.
Yeah, we touched on it in this card. Like a guy like Jeremiah Wells that just completely forgot what MMA was at the start of his last fight and just ran into the cage and then thought, I'm here. This is a part of it. For Josh Emmett, no. He does move side to side so quickly and so well, keeps his chin tucked, keeps himself on the inside. And that's the other thing. You look at this fight. Josh Emmett, 5 inches shorter, but only 2 inches less in terms of his reach. He knows his size very well. That might sound silly to hear it from me. We touch on this all the time. There's so many Stefan Struves out there in MMA. There's so many welterweights that are 6 feet tall that have no idea how to use the length and reach that they have, that they end up in boxing range and they get clipped. Josh Emmett's one of those guys that understands that distance management so very well. So if we do have a look at the odds, we already hit your fan votes that are out there. Calvin Kattar is the favorite, open -170, -244 right now. Josh Emmett open to +145, +194 as it stands. So another fight, Matt, on this card where there's more than a 2-1 favorite. So what's the pick here?
Calvin Kattar is going to win this fight until he doesn't, and for that sole reason, I've got Calvin Kattar. Kattar's going to be the more likely fighter to win rounds in this fight. I know Josh Emmett has career-altering power, like you would say, but again, he has to land that power from to really be able to win a round. And unless you think Josh Emmett's going to end the fight with Calvin Kattar with 3-4 knockdowns, or win by knockout, of course, I am going to find it very difficult for Emmett to make his way into the 25th minute and be able to bank 3 rounds. I just don't think he does enough on the in-betweens to really be able to secure enough minutes and enough moments to win a decision in a 5-round fight. But on the flip side, and again, I'm arguing with myself today, a 5-round fight could help Josh Emmett because every time he's in the cage, it's just like a 10% chance. Is this punch going to land? Because if it does, he'll win by knockout. It just gives him 10 more minutes of opportunities to land that one fight ender against Calvin Kattar. And we do know that Emmett does carry his power very late into fights. So I think this is going to be an incredible fight no matter who is able to get the win. I'm surprised the odds are as far apart as they are. I see this fight as being like Calvin Kattar, maybe like a -150 around there, I'd say, just because he is quite hittable. And against a guy like Josh Emmett, that's probably the last attribute that you want to be known for. But I do have Calvin Kattar in this fight because I just think he's going to be able to win rounds on a more consistent basis.
Yeah, the only sites that have Emmett to win inside of the distance, like, it's kind of crazy to see it. So Emmett wins by decision plus 470. Like, you look at it that way. So Emmett wins inside of the distance plus 408. Wins by submission plus 2,000, so it's way up there. Wins by KO or TKO, it's around, again, another plus 400, plus 435. So, again, if Josh Emmett's going to win, more than likely he wins by finish if he wins at all. For Calvin Kattar, again, it's the accumulation of volume to me, and I know it's going to be either Josh Emmett knocks him out, Calvin Kattar wins by decision. There's also the type of reality where Calvin Kattar is able to either catch him in the in-between or he's able to just put that accumulation on him, similar to what we've seen Max Holloway do to fighters, where he was able to break down a Brian Ortega. There is a possibility that Calvin Kattar can take that game plan and implement it against a guy like Josh Emmett. So I will be eager to see what we get out of both these fighters, eager to see the game plan out of New England Cartel, who also have a fighter in this co-main event of Joe Lauzon taking on Cowboy Cerrone. So maybe Lauzon gets a win, like puts a beer on his eye and then kind of cools it down and walks back out. And for Josh Emmett with Team Alpha Male, will they mix in the wrestling? That remains to be seen, but a really good main event.
Oh, I'm really excited for this fight. Again, both guys are going to be very similar versions of themselves in the 5th round as they are in the 1st round. That's all you can ask for in a main event. Like, sometimes you get a heavyweight main event, you're a little worried what it's going to look like after it goes past that 1st round. These guys are going to be game no matter what point of the fight it is, no matter what position the fight's in. I think it's going to be a great fight, but yeah, I still have Calvin Kattar.
Big time main event, both of us going with the Boston Bird friend. It is Calvin Kattar to get the win. Question mark kicks 2 hours before the prelims. Mark it on your calendar. Set the notifications here on YouTube. Subscribe if you have not already so you can catch us live for that show on Saturday. Toss a like. It really does help out the show. You folks do a great job of that over on Question Mark Kicks as well. Everybody that hits up the super chat, that hits up a super like, and that helps out the channel and helping all of us grow in 2022. We got some great fights coming up this weekend. Next weekend, Mateusz Gamrot taking on a tricky Arman Tsarukyan. It's a great time to be an MMA fan, so keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. As we always say, let's get into it.